Quite a beautiful country, and I really like this country as well. With that, let me then introduce myself. I'm Solomon Mbai. I'm originally from Namibia, but I'm an offspring of South Africa. I studied in South Africa. I'm a director of a trade policy institute. So our institute is based at the University of Namibia in Windhoek. And part of what we are doing is to create evidence for policy formulation, to stimulate dialogue for polity, so that evidence-based policies are then formulated. In addition to that, I'm a board member of ANAPRI. And in my other life, I have to do it that way. I am a farmer. From a practical perspective, specifically I'm farming with cattle, and that's my interest. And because of my recent appointment by the Namibian government, I'm a member of the Namibian Agronomic Board, responsible for crop value chain development in Namibia. And some people will always say, but how do you talk about crops in a dry country? But then the question is, where are you basically basing your argument on? Because if you look at the northwestern or northeastern, we get average rainfall between 600 and 800 millimeters. In addition to that, we have natural perennial rivers. May we please give the organizers, just before we start, a big round of applause for organizing this event. It is now my distinguished honor to welcome on board Dr. Anthony Chapoto, our Executive Director of ANAPRI. And I would urge, just in the interest of time, urge all of you to consult the conference booklet for the bios of the different speakers. So Anthony is an ag economist with a broad experience across sub-Saharan Africa, and his interest is in ag productivity or agricultural productivity, technology adoption, aspects of commercialization, policy reform, and also with an emphasis on climate growth. Anthony, can I welcome you? Thank you.
Good morning. Let me ride on his protocols that he has already established, or protocols observed. My name is Anthony, as he has indicated. I love to make sure that our food systems is transformed in Africa. And I hold a position where I coordinate different centers across the continent to do that job in their own countries. And it's a very privileged position, and I thank all the support that we receive from our partners, the governments that we work with, the private sector, civil society, and many more. We have a session in the afternoon where we are going to do official opening. So I'm not going to say any remarks, because I will say something in the afternoon where we have set aside that time. But I thought, as your host, I needed to welcome you to Kigali, Rwanda. The day that you have been waiting for has arrived, but it started to arrive yesterday because we had some great pre-conference activities, and I met probably half of you, and today we have grown bigger. So basically, let me say, ANAPRI is pleased to have you here. We don't take it for granted. You have come a long way. We have been planning this for almost a whole year, so I don't take it for granted. So we really want to welcome you to Rwanda, Kigali. Our host, EPRN, will welcome you in the afternoon nicely, but we thought that before we go into this technical session, the first session, people would wonder, why would we start with a techno session? Why don't we start with an official opening session? ANAPRI's tradition is to always do its opening in the afternoon to allow partners across the globe too, as many as those that can fall. Time difference is always tricky, but we chose to do our opening in the afternoons. So during the next 2.5 days, we have come up with a very enriching, very rich program that will allow us to interface as stakeholders who are trying to drive ag and food systems transformation in Africa. Today, we have 2 technical sessions. That is one that my colleague Mbai will facilitate, and then we have another one on CADAP. In the afternoon, we have official opening. We'll end the day with a bit of mingling. We have set up a cocktail for you, where we will interact, because I think we value more the interaction. I think when we talk to each other more, we share ideas, we discuss and reflect on things that would have gone on in the day. So that will be day 1 for you. Then we'll go to day 2, where we dig deeper now into what ANAPRI is doing as a network, how it is interfacing with partners, different programs, what programs we have. So we'll showcase a few things that we are doing, and we have invited partners to work with us during that day. And then the 3rd day is a day where we say, okay, let's bring it to a close. But it will start with a session where we also demonstrate partnership and collaboration. We have partnered with FAO, and the theme for this conference, which is talking about food systems transformation, what is it that we need? What are the investments we need? What are the policies we need? And we bring it together and say, probably what we need is systems thinking. So we have a session, very brilliant session that we have put together in partnership with the FAO. And last but not least, because the world is changing. I'm sure a few years ago, we had so much funding. But the globe has changed. All of a sudden, the switch has turned. And our centers face tremendous difficulties to fund their work. Our partners face serious challenges in funding their work. So what we have been trying to innovate, to say, probably we need to rethink the way we look at development. And the last session that we will go through is to demonstrate partnerships, coalitions, and we invite a few partners that we have been discussing with throughout the year to just outline how these collaborations work and how we can leverage the resources that we have to be able to deliver and transform the continent. And lastly, we do a closing session. With that, let me welcome you again to Kigali. Let me invite back Salomo to lead you in the first session. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Edie. Let me now just briefly, take you through the objectives of the first high-level plenary session. The theme of our session is a very interesting one indeed: navigating global disruptions and Africa's food system futures. I think if you briefly listen to the message that is being propagated through this conference theme, it's basically asking for interventions relating to our capabilities to navigate through shocks, and that navigation process emanates from preparedness, be it in terms of policies, be it in terms of regulations, and also, the most important aspect of it all is, do we have budgetary capabilities? in our midst to deal? Do we have some alternative markets to deal with all these disruptions? So the objectives of this session is to, in a nutshell, I'll be very brief, to examine how current and emerging global shocks, and this includes, among others, not limited to the trade conflicts, funding withdrawal, energy crisis, and how those are shaping global and regional food systems. That's the first objective. Objective 2 is to provide insights on implications of these disruptions on Africa's food system, trade, agricultural transformation, and development, and highlight both vulnerabilities and opportunities. The second last one is to share examples of how African countries and regional bodies are navigating these shocks, including innovations, policy and regulation responses, and institutional adjustments. In addition to that is also to engage the different policymakers, researchers, private sector, and development partners in a high-level dialogue on resilience strategies that balance immediate crisis response with long-term food system transformation. And then lastly is to identify priority actions and policy directions for strengthening Africa's food system resilience and positioning the continent to drive inclusive growth under sustained global uncertainty. There is a notion, from my end within the crop sector that most of the time we talk about food security, right? And as African countries, if we are not seed secure from that aspect, let's forget about talking about food security. As a starting point, we need to also, in addition to that, enable the livestock sectors to be able to come out of, as quick as possible, come out of challenges pertaining to be it drought or disease outbreak. Now with that, allow me to welcome Abdi Ali. He's an economist responsible for markets and trade divisions for the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. The topic that he will be presenting to us is global disruptions, agri-food systems, and he will specifically talk about performance, risks, and future pathways. In a nutshell, Ali is an economist in markets, as I've indicated earlier on, and if you look at his responsibilities, also speaks to aspects pertaining to trade analysis and also provisions of policy directives. Ali, can I hand over to you just to take us through your presentation for 15 minutes? Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Salomo. Initially, when I was asked to present this, I was told it would be 25 minutes, but I will try to do it within 15 minutes. I am an economist at FAO in the Markets and Trade Division. And initially, when I was asked to speak about global disruptions and African agriculture, I couldn't help but think, reflect on how other regions fared when the recent crisis happened. At the height of these events in 2021, 2022, agricultural producers in many regions in North America, in Eastern Europe, in the European Union, made record profits. It was one of the highest profits that they ever made. But, that led me to think, why is Africa vulnerable to these shocks? The reasons are well known, obviously, and they're widely discussed. So I'll touch upon them, but I'm not gonna you know, explore. I'm not gonna like talk about them much, but what I will do instead is talk about how, in general, African agriculture performed in the face of these shocks. I'm not going to give you a sophisticated analysis. I'm going to give you a simple metrics to see how we've performed over time and what the cost of inactions are. Which way is the... Yeah, it's good. So this way, right? Global disruptions are not new. They happen every time. This is the FAO Food Price Index, and I annotated with a few crises that led to the peaks that you see. And this is not an exhaustive list. There's many more, especially in the last 5 to 6 years. It's not just only the Ukraine war or the COVID-19 pandemic that happened. It was trade wars, trade protectionism, destabilizing markets, African swine fever, decimating the pig populations in Asia, and even logistical bottlenecks, like in the Suez Canal, where we had a blockage, and also in the Panama Canal, where the water level was lower. So these are not new things, and they're going to happen, and they might happen more frequently and with much greater intensity. Their consequences are mostly similar. You have volatile markets, you have fiscal constraints, you have increased inequality in access to food, and you have high undernourishment, especially for the African consumers. The cost of these recent disruptions, they were staggering for prices, budgets, and people. At the peaks in 2022, I think it was in the spring of 22, nitrogen fertilizer prices went up by 300%. Food prices was higher by more than 70%. And the African food import bill ballooned to 108 billion. That's 43% higher than what it was in 2019. And 273 million Africans were undernourished. That's 17% higher from where it was in 2019. So these are staggering impacts. And it shows you that if we don't do anything, if the systems are not strong to respond to crisis, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, then we will have a lot greater consequences. Now, they're not happening in, these disruptions are happening in the face of financial constraints. In 2023, $700 billion was spent by governments on agriculture. The small blue part is Africa's share, which is 2%. Now, Asia, on the other hand, and a developing region, most of the developing region, spends a lot more than the rest of the world. And they're doing so because they're investing in agriculture, they're investing in increasing availability of foods, and they're investing in productivity. And some of the investments are not really, they're not really essentially necessarily good. I mean, some of the subsidies might be distorting, right? Places like China and India, mostly they're pursuing self-sufficiency and sort of that's closed markets essentially, and local production being mostly satisfied from domestic markets. Now, the region in Africa also depends a lot heavily on development follows, but the funding envelope for that is really small. It's about 18 billion compared to the 700 billion that's spent by governments. But that lifeline is also dissipating, is also decreasing. The OECD projects that in sub-Saharan Africa, official development follows could decrease by between 16% to 28% after decreasing 2% in 2024. And as countries reprioritize these donors reprioritize domestic projects, the outlook remains highly, highly uncertain. And this is a challenge. So we have, what this causes is you have the rest of the world is spending a lot on agriculture. You have fiscal issues in sub-Saharan Africa where the governments are not spending a lot and where development flows are now contracting. And so that actually causes farmers not to invest in risk management. They face greater competition from the rest of the world. And it's difficult for them to continue to invest in resilience. Now, even though the challenges exist, Africa's agri-food system must deliver, and rightly so. Among other things, the region has, the agri-food system has to deliver safe, nutritious, affordable food for all, not just calories, but also proteins, vitamins, and minerals. And they must provide dignified livelihoods for farmers and workers along the supply chain. And in doing those two, the agri-food sector should also protect the natural resources and adapt to climate change for long-term productivity and viability. Now, the question that needs to be asked is, who does the onus or the burden fall into? And how have they done in the past? And the who starts with millions of smallholder farmers. African farmers generally are like, small family farms, cultivating few hectares of land. And there's also a vast network of agri-food SMEs, often informal, that run the system and connect farmers to consumers. And so the owners, because the region is not actually supporting these actors with financial resources, the owners to meet these goals is on them. And one might ask, how have they performed in the face of this crisis, in the face of these global disruptions, and in the face of these financial challenges? And I'm going to show you a couple of slides on this, simple metrics. How have they performed? I'm going to ask myself, how have they produced enough food for Africans, and how has that food production increased or decreased over time relative to the population growth? And this slide essentially tells part of that story. Let me focus on the blue solid line first. This graph is on gross production per capita divided by divided by population. And as you can see, between 1990 to 2018, this production per capita grew by 30% over time. It grew steadily. That is incredible, isn't it? In the face of challenges, in the face of disruptions, we've seen a remarkable growth over time. But then the recent events came, and what you see there is a decline, it's a regression. The per capita production has declined from 2019 to 2024. What this tells us is that African farmers have pushed hard, but the challenges of the recent issues or events have been so much for them to bear. The projections only show a little recovery to 2030. Now, one might ask, if production per capita has been increasing steadily, why have we not made success in decreasing hunger in Africa? And that's, but that is not the responsibility of farmers. the responsibility of farmers is to produce. Access issue is, on the other hand, not on them. Access depends on physical access, the connectivity, the infrastructure, and also the economic access. So we've put so much burden on these smallholder farmers, but they have been performing well. And if we don't support them going forward, then we risk a regression going forward. Now, the other thing that I want to show, another success story, is that African farmers did not actually only produce, they produced with less emissions per capita. If you see this graph, the convergence to the global average has been steep over the last few decades. We're still far away from the global average, but the rate of convergence has been steep. And going forward, there's been some little bit of uptick there during the last few years because of the recent events. But they've done so much in reducing emissions per capita, which speaks to evidence of investments in efficiency of production and investments in productivity. Now, there's still challenges going ahead. I mean, we have to, a lot of emissions come from our livestock industry, which needs to be, which needs to see further improvement. And this brings me to this slide, which is about production of livestock and fish and fruits and vegetables, nutritious foods. While African farmers have done so much in terms of producing crops, the production per capita of livestock and fish, nutritious food, is lagging. And so this speaks to the diversity of the food that we produce. And diversity of the food we produce will also reflect the diversity of food that African consumers have. Now, there are opportunities to get this back, especially in the livestock sector. Usually, if I give you some perspective, as an example, in the cattle industry, we have 4 times the herd size of North America, and there are a lot of cows in North America. And we only have 1/10 of their productivity. So there's a huge improvement needed going forward in the livestock sector. That's where an opportunity exists. And we also have to understand livestock is also at the nexus of a lot of sustainable development goals. Whether it's food security, nutrition, climate, well, even conflict. So investing in agriculture, in livestock production is a crucial opportunity and one of the low-hanging fruits in African agriculture. Now, where do we go from this? Where we are at declining output per capita over recent years, we have a livestock sector that's underperforming. We have high undernourishment and food security. And in addition, we have multiple challenges. Global disruptions are happening, and they are affecting African agriculture more disproportionately. Climate change impacts are going to intensify because of support in other regions. African farmers are facing a lot of competition. There's limited access to finance, as I've shown, that only 2% of global agricultural expenditure comes from Africa. And there are a host of other domestic issues, other local issues. So where do we go from here? Now, we could go with a business as usual, where we have gradual improvements and vulnerability remains. We could, continue whatever policy framework that we have, whatever reactionary responses that we have, and hopefully gradually improve. But the vulnerability will remain. Or it could be a transformative pathway where there are bold investments, where there's high productivity and resilience. Or it's a stagnation where these events happen more frequently and with greater intensity. So the path that we forge ahead is important, and it should happen now. With that, I give the floor back to the moderator. Thank you.
Thank you, Ali, for an insightful presentation. I would just ask for those of you that are interested in French translation, I think at the back, right at the back there, we will be in a position to assist you. Let me now take this opportunity just to open up the floor to take up some few questions, and so that we can then engage and re-engage on this interesting topic. We have some speakers there, right in the middle, one on the left-hand side and one on the right-hand side there, if you have some interest to engage in this very interesting topic. The floor is open. Can we just invite colleagues from the audience? Some inputs, additions? Okay, so I see no movement. I will then pick people from the audience, basically to engage. And we have a very capable team, here to either give some comments around these interesting topics. I think the first culprit will be Luke. Luke, can I give you the freedom to engage?
Thank you. Thanks for putting the picture and also a bit of historical picture. I think that's quite useful. One thing I'll just pick up a couple of points which struck me was your starting point on the price. So I hadn't realized we are basically at prices 2 times the 2000 level. If you bring back that, it's sort of production went up. We're really sitting at that food prices which are way above what they were in let's say, 1980 to 2000. So are these real prices or are these nominal prices? And so that would still seem to suggest that there is a supply issue as well. Or why do you? What's your reading of why this hasn't come down further? Because it goes. It's not only that it had before there had been a downward trend. Over the past 2 decades, basically, we have had an upward trend. So how do you see that with regard to supply? Or is it more on the demand or the trading side? Or if you could comment a little bit on that.
Thank you. Can we then, think with that warm-up, invite once again? Or else I'll pick. Yes, thank you very much. There you are. Can you just right over there? We take 2 more questions.
Many thanks, the speaker. Thank you, sir. I just wanted to pick it up from your last slide on charting the road ahead. I guess the first option is not available. We can't be business as usual. Neither is the third option feasible, stagnation and regression. So which brings us to the transformative pathway that you mentioned. I just wanted to know your thoughts as FAO on what this entails. Can you unpack this? If you have had time to think about it, what should we do along these lines? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. The last question before we invite Ali to respond.
Yeah. Good morning. Andrew Mould from UN Economic Commission for Africa. So I also was a bit perplexed by the food price index over the long run, because it really implies that food prices are at historic highs. So I'm wondering about the deflators that FAO are using. Even if we have had this really large surge in prices over recent years, it still seems to me difficult to believe that food prices are at historic high. Never seen so much. I think some reflection on how that's presented, those numbers, perhaps even as a percentage of incomes, for example, on food purchases, might be more revealing. I also just had a quick comment on the food trade balance. So you showed the figures for 2022. I think you showed $108 billion deficit for the African continent. Now, I think the important point to stress is the last 2 years, that deficit has diminished again. And if you look at the net balance for the continent, actually it's improved quite significantly. So it's standing at around a negative of 22 billion rather than the gross figure of just showing the imports themselves. So there has been a modest improvement in the performance, and I'm always showing the FAO graph actually comparing the food trade deficit on the continent with that of the Asian continent, which is 6 times higher. So I think those figures need to be looked in their proper perspective. You know, yes, Africa has some serious challenges, but it's not alone in those challenges. There are some common challenges globally where we have, you know, a lot of global net importers and a reduced number of global net food exporters.
Thank you very much. Ali, over to you.
Thank you. Let me try to tackle the 2 questions on the prices. The prices I show are nominal prices; they're not real prices first. And usually, when it comes to real prices, there is. I work on the OECD FAO outlook, and usually our message is real prices are declining over time. But then there is also a counter argument. If you look at prices since 1960, you can see that there's also some uptick actually in real prices that's happening. So that is on the real prices. The idea that why we have declining real prices, marginally declining, not a lot, is because with time, you know, productivity improves, supply sort of like responds. You know, usually demand is rigid, and food demand is rigid, and where the food prices mostly depend on how supply shifts, right? If it's up or not, like people are consuming more or less similar levels of food because it's an essential need. But the graph that you saw on the nominal price, it has been increasing, and we've reached some of the highest prices in 2022. It's been coming down. There's a little uptick right now. I don't know if it's probably related to what's happening in the Middle East, but generally the prices are way higher than where they were before, nominal prices. Even when you deflate, real prices are still higher than where we were prior to the recent crisis. In terms of food import bill, the graphic that I show was mostly on the impacts of what happened after these successive shocks. You know, we had, you know, African swine fever, we had trade war, we had COVID, we had a lot of problems that COVID brought in. You know, logistical issues. There were other logistical issues that happened, and then we had the Ukraine war, right? So these things, what I was trying to show is what actually happened to the food import bill in Africa when such crises happen. But as you said, they've come down, and it's true they've come down. I was trying to just sort of like put forward that what happens when the systems are not strong enough to withstand shocks. Especially for Africa. For the transformative pathways, I wish I didn't have to answer this because I don't know. Well, the other 2 options are not an option, really. All the metrics that we sort of like evaluate our agri-food system will not move or will either regress. But I think there have to be some ingredients for the transformative options. They have to be the right investment so that we can increase productivity, right? Targeted investments so that we can increase productivity. And they have to be, we have to have the right policies, right, so that farmers can invest in resilience. And the third is we have to have partnerships so that projects or programs can be scaled, right? And those are, so essentially we should have an enabling environment that allows for these transformative pathways to happen.
Thank you. There's one final burning question at the back. Can we just give him an opportunity? Very, very brief.
Thank you, Abdi, for your presentation. FAO is at the heart of promoting South-South cooperation in agriculture development. But when you look at the nature of investments from Asia to Africa, for example, I'll give an example of Uganda. You see, like, for example, there is a concentration in cash crops. Like, for example, India is heavily invested in sugarcane growing in Uganda, which isn't enhancing our food systems in any way. And when you look at Malaysia's investments in Uganda is in palm oil. So my question is, how can we really attract the right investments from Asia to transform Africa's agriculture systems away from sugar and palm oil? Thank you.
All right. You have more questions?
I think that's the last one. That's the last one. We have to get... Yeah, just a brief introduction of yourself.
My name is Kayanja Julius from Agricom, Uganda.
Thank you. That's the last one.
Okay, so I don't work in the South-South cooperation, but I can give you a general reasoning or general idea of why. I think like FAO, every country is a member of FAO, right? If the right investments are not, if the investments are not going into the right industry, or the country does not identify the right priorities, then I think it's sort of like the relationship between FAO and that country has to be, so the relationship on that nature has to be worked out in the sense that the country has to be able to say that we think that this sector is worth investment because it's important for this and this. I think one reason that we see a lot of investments going into cash crops is because they fetch, cash. We get, and they improve livelihoods, right? Farmers export these crops and get money instead of stables. Essentially what happens with the stables is a lot of farmers are growing stables for food consumption, for subsistence, and selling the little, the remainder that they have to the market. But sometimes what happens is that the infrastructure, the connectivity is not there for them to sort of realize this price and sell these goods. And there's a lot of issues around. But the supply chains for these cash crops are well established. And maybe that's why a lot of investment is going into that industry. But I think it's on the responsibility of our members to identify this and say where the right investment should go in. I also want to add that related to what I was presenting, it's in terms of crop production, stable crop production, we've been doing well. I mean, we've done that for generations. We understand like our farms. We have challenges. There's a lot of challenges that are facing the sector. But essentially, we understand how to grow crops. We understand our soil. Yes, we don't apply enough fertilizer. Yes, climate change and host of a lot of other issues are degrading our soil. But at least, we've been so successful in producing enough stable crops to feed Africans, right? How that food gets to consumers is a different story than, as I say.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end of Ali's presentation. Can we just give him a big round of applause, please? So up next, let me just invite the panel members. The first one is online. Wandile Sislobo. I hope you're able to log on so that we can see you here. And also at the same time, I am inviting Nancy Laibuni think you are around, so that you can just come forward here. And Innocent, are you around from the fertilizer industry? And then lastly, Chris Chibwana. Yeah, just a quick correction there, Stephen. Yeah, Stephen, is it Rubisi? Are you here? Stephen? Thank you so much. I'm just hoping to see Wandile. Is he on board, Wandile?
Yeah, Chair, I am on board and here.
Great. Where should I take a seat? Okay, you have to move it. Yeah, now that we have the panel up and running, including Wandile that is online, what I will just do briefly is just to outline the process that we will go through here. I'll give each and every panel member an opportunity to respond to one or two questions. And once we are done with that, we will then invite colleagues from the audience to engage, provide some comments and so on. And as reminded by the ED, it's important when you are given a chance to ask a question to introduce yourself so that we can appreciate who you are and the angle of your engagement. So first of all, I will then introduce Wandile Sislobo. He's online, he's a chief economist of the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, and also a leading voice in the agricultural economics and policy. And beyond AgBiz, he serves as a senior lecturer extraordinary at the University of Stellenbosch. He's also a visiting research fellow at Wits School of Governance and a research associate at Rhodes University. Wandile, welcome. Welcome on board.
Thank you, Chair.
And up next is Innocent Okuku. Innocent is the Director General and CEO of Africa Fertilizer Industry Development Association, and this is a body that brings together all fertilizer industries across, including your manufacturers, traders, distributors, and retailers, as well as national and regional fertilizer industry associations across Africa. And then up next is Nancy. I think we've had a privilege to engage you yesterday. So Nancy is an advisor in the Kenya's office of the President. She's a member of the President's Council of Economic Advisors, and with over 20 years experience in agricultural policy and value chain analysis, she's a champion for evidence-based decision making. Nancy, welcome. And just my apologies, I just have to hand over the mic for the two colleagues to do the thorough introduction and do justice by introducing themselves. So before we start engaging in our deliberations, can I then start over with you here, right next to me?
Thank you so much. My name is Steven Luzibiza. I'm the CEO of Rwanda Private Sector Federation, which is equivalent to the Chamber of Commerce in other jurisdictions. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. Just pass on the mic. Oh, we have a mic right over here.
Good morning. My name is Chris Iwana. I work for the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation based in California. And prior to that, I worked for ALCRA, and I've worked in the agriculture sector for quite a few years.
Thank you very much. Can we just maybe just appreciate the panel that is here? Quite a robust panel at our disposal, and regionally well represented in terms of our geographic locations and where our centers are based. First and foremost, let me just then engage my colleague and a dear friend, Wandile, just with your specific focus on trade disruptions, market shocks, and private sector adaptation. As you have had, right, how best can African countries, right, engage in addressing all these disruptions? That's the first question that I give to you, just to ensure that our sectors are resilient. Wandile, over to you.
Yeah, thank you so very much, Sol, and good morning to everyone that is in the room there. I'm sorry that I couldn't be there in person. So I was bullied into this panel by Anthony, the executive director, and Tinashe. And the reason they did that is because I sit in the intersection of government and private sector, similarly to Stephen, who's sitting next to you there. I sit at the Agricultural Business Chamber of South Africa, but at the same time, spending a bit of time in government, in advisory, in the leadership in the country, and of course on the private sector. And Anthony's point in running up into this discussion was exactly that. What is it that we are doing in South Africa that perhaps maybe may have some areas that some countries in the continent may consider? And of course, an opportunity for us to listen to what Nancy and the others are doing in Kenya, what Stephen and the others are doing, and that we can implement on our side. And I'll answer then your question, Sol, by really honing on that to say, how does the alignment between the government priorities and the private sector priorities in South Africa, and of course in the journey of even closing the dualism that exists in South Africa, because we are not just the country that has large-scale agriculture. There's still very much a large share of farmers that are in the small-scale farming and in the process of wanting to reach those commercial levels. I think at a basic level is what everyone in the room is aware of. What we've been able and fortunate to do is ensuring that we have the robust structures on the commodity associations. I know that some of the countries in the continent, they do have those, but others, those commodity associations could be improved, whereby you know that the Grain Council is strong, the vegetable associations are strong, the fruit associations are strong, and all of them. And ideally, if they are funded locally, that does help, because then it doesn't create an impression that they are receiving funds outside that want to influence what must happen domestically. The reason I'm raising this, Sol, because I think to an extent they link to Ali's last point. You may recall the last question that was posed to Ali was about how can farmers in parts of Uganda make sure that they grow what the world market will need, and what the investments must also be targeted to those areas. But there's a misalignment. I think that's the question that the gentleman from Uganda was asking from Ali. And I think structures like this in South Africa, then they help, because what they do, the farmers in all of those commodity associations, they are able to articulate what they see as a need for themselves. But that's just one part of the organization of the sector. The second one, it has to ensure that then there are a number of branches that are looking like ANAPRI. On our side, your friends, Anthony, at BFEP, they play a huge role in South Africa alongside with others on making sure that they assist these commodity associations on understanding and articulating what are some of the key things that are needed for driving growth and driving inclusivity that we so need in South Africa. That's the one part of making sure that those priorities are there and are clear. And of course, the government on its side usually sets up these long-term plans that are there and are necessary. But then where all of this comes together in a beautiful way, at least in our perspective, is that we've managed then to set up these structures like the NEDLEC structures, which is a national body where private sector, academia, researchers, and the government sit together, and then they would map up what do they think are these priorities. The private sector outlining what they think, the researchers outlining what they think is necessary, and of course, the government assessing if they agree with all of these things. And I think this, to us, it ends up coming together and providing us a platform where we are able to have national priorities. Either it's higher value crops or labor-intensive crops. And of course, then outlining in each of those commodities about what is needed and what are the responsibilities of each of those stakeholders. And towards my ending here, the last key thing then that we have been able, at least in the recent past, to put together is what we call in South Africa the Agriculture and Agro-Processing Master Plan. And Dr. Mato Khalapa, who's sitting right at the back on the row on the far left, he actually is one of the people that is the authors of that document, and he was able to deal with all of the divisions in opinions between private sector, academia, and the government. But we all agreed and came up with the plan. Once then that plan is on the table, it is up to the government, the private sector of South Africa, to go out and sell it and make sure that the investment and the promotion of this plan are really narrowed and channeled towards those areas. That's so at the high level is what we've been able to do. But I would close by saying this. It is easier, of course, to come up and map up these at a higher level when you already have some of the basics in place. I do think that some of the things that came up on Ali's presentation about the issues of infrastructure, the fragmentation of value chain, you first and foremost, at least the public sector has to ensure that the investments in those areas is rigorous and it's done. Then the softer planning that is about prioritization of commodities and prioritization of export markets is a far easier way when we have been able to deal with some of the areas that need the heavy private sector investments, as well as some of the legislative changes that are necessary on attracting this investment. And I think that is what has been able to, for us, to create that dance between the private sector and the government, and we've seen the money following through that. I see you smiling, so I'm not sure if this is not what you are observing when you are in South Africa, but let me shut up before Anthony also smiles and tells me to shut up, and then we can hear what Stephen and the others are observing there in Rwanda.
No, I just like what you're saying. It's actually like music to my ears. Thank you. Let me just start on my right on my far left. Specifically, the focus here is just to engage us from a donor perspective, looking at aspects of financing and partnership priorities. Chris, based on your observations, how have recent global funding contractions affected agricultural development priorities, and what adjustments are donor, funding institutions looking at? What are they looking at in terms of creating sustainability?
I'm not sure I actually have an answer to the first part of the question. I think we all have seen, the demise of USAID. So I actually used to work for USAID. Spent a good 7 years inside of USAID in the early days of my life. And to see it dismantled has been very heartbreaking. I've also colleagues and friends that were still at USAID, and to see them lose jobs, to see the programs that USAID funded be closed, Feed the Future was a big thing. And I think a lot of the members of ANAPRI that are in here were participating and getting funding, lots of funding from USAID. So I think everybody has been personally affected by the changes in the funding landscape. But I think what we've seen as a reaction to that, and I can speak for philanthropy because that's where I work. I'm not going to speak for the entire funding sector. But I think what we're seeing is there's a move towards from doing more to doing what matters most. So from doing everything to being very strategic, to being very selective. And so we're seeing that a lot of donors are focusing on fewer and more catalytic interventions rather than just broad programming. And I think examples of that, we've seen moves towards investing in systemic levers like data systems, evidence. How can we help governments do more with less resources? I think it's elevated the role of data and evidence. The importance of evidence-informed decision-making, I think, has become more paramount. I think we've also seen, at least in the philanthropic sector, a shift from delivery towards partnerships. And the contractions, I think, are pushing a lot of donors to rethink their role, not just as financiers, because I think, as we know, USAID, the gap that's been left by USAID is huge, and it cannot be filled by anybody. In 2023, USAID alone programmed $42 billion. If you think about philanthropy, in 2023, philanthropy collectively programmed $12 billion. So you think about your Rockefeller foundations, your Gates foundations, and everybody else put together was just a very small fraction of what USAID programmed. So there's not an intention to try and replace what was lost, what has been lost, but I think to think about what is our role. Can we use our role as catalysts to convene, to align, and to enable others? And I think the final shift that we've seen is moving from grants to identifying, could we do blended investments that unlock additional resources from the private sector, climate finance, or these other new sources of financing that I think the sector needs to continue to function and to be resilient. And so I guess that leads me to then, what's the role of networks like ANAPRI in all of this? I think we can't continue to do business as usual. Obviously, we're no longer doing business as usual. Those large-scale national surveys that we used to do are no longer possible because the funding for those has gone away. And so how do we still deliver advice to governments on what they should be doing, what they should be prioritizing, when we can't do large-scale surveys, when we can't do surveys with N equals 3,000? What other sources of evidence and data can we leverage to still be useful and relevant? Because governments, I think, need that advice now. And I think that's really a huge role that the network has, the expertise that the network has, the geographic reach, and the deep relationships that members of ANAPRI have with governments. I think that's something that needs to be leveraged. I think I still see the role of networks like ANAPRI as conveners of coherence. And so I think events like this, to the extent that they're inclusive and that they're not just a group of friends coming together and talking to each other, preaching to the choir, to the extent that these are inclusive of other voices, donors, governments, and others, that there's a role there for a network like ANAPRI to play to just help ensure coherence, that everybody is prioritizing the same things, everybody's working on the same things. And I guess the third role that a network like ANAPRI has is essentially as an amplifier of African agency. Given that funding has declined, I think there's a realization that nobody's coming to save us, that we have to take charge of our own development journeys. I think there's a desire by governments to try and raise more money domestically to finance agriculture. I think commitments like CADEP are now even more important. And so how can ANAPRI members, how can the network support governments to actually implement what they've committed to doing? I think that really is important, and it means, in many ways, I think, changing the face of an academic, that you're not just working to publish and get a promotion, get citation, raise your edge factor, that you're actually working hand in hand with government to help them make the best decisions that they can, given the resources that governments have at the moment. And so I think it's a moment of reckoning for all of us to rethink what's really the role of an agricultural policy research institute. Is it to just foster knowledge production, or is it to actually be in service of policymakers?
Thank you very much for those insights. Up next, I will just now go to Nancy. And I've got just an interesting question to you in terms of what other African countries can learn from Kenya in terms of Kenya's approach of balancing fiscal constraints, right, with the need to protect food and input markets.
I'll just dive right in, and to say that the Kenyan government then, of course, was required to prioritize once the administration got into power. And because we are not unique from any other African country, and we got into government at a time when we had all the crises that have been then, and we'd like to hear what the private sector said. They had a bit of noise as a result. But nonetheless, for us, it put us in a situation where we're able to increase the food production, and the rains, the weather favored us immediately. The other thing we did was then to stabilize our foreign exchange rate, and this was a cocktail of many initiatives. One was basically a fiscal monetary policy. We had a financial trade financing arrangement on petroleum between two governments, what we call the G2G, petroleum financing trade arrangement that had then reduced the pressure for dollars. And so our oil marketers got into some agreement where the government then provided a guarantee for them to be able to not demand for the dollars immediately, but get a credit facility that allows them to pay later. The other initiatives then also was to rein on to our labor mobility strategy, where we now just cleaned up the space technically to make it sure that we reduce the aspects that were not so transparent, and it became more evident and more clear that we knew who was going where, what were they doing, and giving them even the comfort to know that they can be repatriated and they can also then remit their remittances properly into the government, back into the country. So it was a cocktail of different initiatives that enabled us to stabilize the foreign exchange rate. And then that gave us an opportunity to start our stabilization initiatives. And this, top in the list, of course, is what you have said, fiscal consolidation. We reined on where we spending our money. Our expenditure needed to be curtailed and ensured focused on areas that would give us the highest return. And then we moved to move all large ticket items, and by large ticket items, I'm talking about big dams, energy projects, to be financed off budget. So we are putting up what we're calling a national infrastructure fund that will take care of the big ticket items, so that then we can free out space in the budget, and then use our budget financing and external grants to do what we'd call our community or pro-poor initiatives, and that is like off-grid energy or power provision, community dams, smallholder irrigation projects. So in a nutshell is to say that there's no one-size-fits-all solution. It's a cocktail of different initiatives, taking cognizant of the big picture where we want to push our country forward, and at the same time, ensuring we make the hard decisions of keeping the country at a level where we can continue with our development agenda, but at the same time make the comfort of Kenyans, reduce the cost of living, ensure that people can have productive lives and can participate in the economy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Quite interesting and insightful as well. Up next now, we're moving to Innocent Okuku from the private sector. And Innocent, can you just briefly take us through about possible strategies that African governments can do in terms of building resilient food systems beyond this piecemeal, short-term crisis management approach from your input fertilizer sector? Thank you.
Thank you very much. And then first, let me thank ANAPRI for having us. I think Anthony has special skills in crowding people in, as I've been alluded to by the first speaker of the panel. But it's really a privilege to be here. And and I'm going to write on one of the comments from Nancy, which is what can governments do to help the agri-food system get better, especially coming from the input perspective. I think the first thing that governments need to help do to enable private sector to play effectively and efficiently their role is to put in place the policy environment that is friendly to businesses in a sustained fashion. Oftentimes, you find governments that come in with certain policies that might look attractive, but they are not sustained. You know, as we have a turnover of people in government, everybody comes, they want their own new policies. And for long-term investment, if the policy environment is not guaranteed for a long time, people, hold back the investment they could have brought in. I'll give practical examples, and I'll start from the case of subsidy, and I'm happy that to try and address a little bit some of the rumors that you may have heard and where it comes from. I mean, subsidies are good, input subsidies are good, but sometimes, if they're not properly structured, they crowd out the private sector. What it does is that it can take a country back 10 years. Let me give a small illustration. So, in any market, if you bring an input subsidy that drops the price of an input by a fraction that is higher than the margins that people who trade in that input make, what you have done is that you have provided products to be round-tripped. The products are not likely to be used by the producers to do what they are meant for. They will go back to the traders. Just an illustration. If a bag of fertilizer sells for $10, and the government comes and says, I will get smallholder farmers to get it at $5. Now, the man who is actually selling that fertilizer
recording in progress.
Making money $2 Now, if a farmer gets it at $5, if he sells at $7, he's made the profit of $2 without waiting for the gestation period of the crop. And you're looking at a farming system that the farmer's output is actually not guaranteed. Even when you have insurance system in place, insurance is often structured to help the farmer recoup the investment that was lost, not to make the profit. So essentially, somehow with a lot of smallholder farmers, selling subsidized input is probably more attractive, a quick win, than it is to use it to produce. And when the traders buy that, they still are able to make margin. So in some way, if it's not properly structured, subsidy can actually be a disincentive. Then you have people who, if you disaggregate smallholder farmer population, you have some who have actually begun to adopt good practices. In other words, they are procuring inputs commercially at market prices. But when they are aware about subsidies that are coming, what happens is that they step back, waiting to participate in what is commonly called, in many parlance across Africa, national cake. Right? It's government money paying for part of my inputs, so I'd rather take it than use my own money. So people who are already on the journey of coming out of poverty as smallholder producers, they fall back into the poverty trap. So somehow subsidies are good. The challenge has been with the way it is structured. So what we often ask is that there should be a system where private and public actors and everybody sit together in a proper conversation to design how a subsidy scheme will work to help the system thrive. What we think is best is to put the fund that is invested in policy at the market end. So you create a consistent pool for farm outputs. One thing we know is that all of the problems that farmers face in being able to continue to produce, once the market is guaranteed and it's profitable, all those problems resolve themselves. access to finance find its way in. You can't access finance if you don't know your market and you're not profitable. But once you show financing partners that you know your market, it's guaranteed you'll be profitable, money will follow you. Once you know that if you adopt a good technology and your yields go up, you will sell at a profitable price, you will adopt the technology. So oftentimes what happens is that we make small growth, but with a little bit of shock, we take a quick action that then jeopardizes some of the progress we've made, so the country retrogresses. So this is the general thing that we see about subsidies. So we love subsidies. The only problem is that they are oftentimes not properly applied. So I hope this kind of. So the second thing I would like to say that needs to be addressed if we want private sector to engage properly from the government side is we do need to sort of create the right financing environment for agricultural production. Cost of finance in many African countries is relatively high. And you cannot produce with the level of cost of finance food crops in a way that you can successfully compete with some of the imported produce. It's why most of our production is not that competitive. So we need to find mechanisms that allow financing agriculture to be at affordable, cheap rates. I wouldn't even say single digit. Actually, it should be less than, it should be in the neighborhood of some 2 to 3% per annum kind of finance. That's what works best for agriculture in our setting. Finally, I know you're already looking at me in the interest of time. I'd like to, address a point that was on Ali's presentation, right? And I think, and he raised the point that smallholder farmers have grown in terms of output by 30% over the last. Yeah, I mean, that can look like a good positive point to make. But the reality is, how does that compare to, number one, our population growth? Because on the African continent, our population has grown over that period at a far higher rate. Now, how do you know that that's really a big problem, that we shouldn't be saying we are doing well by just growing production by 30%? If population have grown by more than 60%, and our food import bills have grown consistently, yes, the shocks made it peak at about 110 billion, but it was already growing consistently before the COVID era shocks. And even beyond it keeps growing. It's driven by our population growth, it's driven by our urbanization, it's driven by the fact that we're not focused on building capacity to produce. So I do think if government stepping and putting some of this right environment, it will help private sector to invest more. And finally, Africa, I use this illustration a lot, right? So if let's say myself and Nancy is Kenya, I am Nigerian, by the way. So let's say Kenya is able to produce far more rice, just hypothetically. I can't produce enough rice. So I buy Nancy's excess, all right? I want to increase my ability to produce rice so I can feed myself in rice. So I go to Nancy, I say, Nancy, you know what? I want to learn from you this rice production skill. And Nancy says, okay, I will help you. Guess what? I will be, for want of a better word, I'll be a fool to fully believe Nancy. It's very straightforward, because what I'm asking Nancy to do is to take off the table the cash flow she gets from selling her excess rice to me. So Africa needs to think about its own agricultural development as its own responsibility. For me, the reduction in aid is actually a wake-up call to what the case should have been. How do we have a continent who is set to hold the world's greatest reserve, the greatest opportunity for agricultural production to grow, and yet we are the continent whose dependence on the outside world is growing? There must be something wrong. So we cannot be a continent that does not have the ability to feed itself, even though we say the potential is there. I am not a fan of hearing the story of aid when I hear there is a potential. If there was not the potential, then that's a different ballgame. So Africa needs to wake up. We can do it, and we will do it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Quite passionate, Stephen. I think up next is you. I'll just give you to do it freely and openly. In terms of your experience, right? How did Rwanda manage to prepare the economy as a whole and the agricultural sector in particular to navigate through all these global disruptions?
Thank you so much. Allow me to thank Anthony for calling me in this event. I thought I was the only one who was bullied into this. But now that I have a colleague from South Africa, I withdraw my case and proceed to the discussions. It is a tough question in terms of trying to navigate through all these disruptions. They were there before humankind. They are here with humankind, and we are likely to leave them behind. So navigating all through this, it's not an easy task. Two, we're at different levels of understanding these disruptions. Each country, each policymaker, each organ that is intervening have their own way of understanding and appreciating the level of these disruptions. And that creates an additional disruption, failure to plan. So if you don't appreciate the magnitude of this disruption that we're talking about, there are those which are coming naturally. The COVID came in naturally, you can't do much about it. The global change, the climate change, yes, some are part contributed by human activities, but others are natural, they come in. So where do we stand as human beings to plan accordingly to avoid all these continuous disruptions? And now brings me back to your question. As a country, Rwanda, how did the country plan? Unfortunately, for the big part of this discussion, I don't come from the government, so I have less or little knowledge about the government policies, though I happen to sit on the tables when they're discussing from private sector discussions as a pattern in the programs that go on. The first thing they did was land consolidation as a government, so that you don't have people using because the Rwanda as a country, they have it's a small country, so the land is highly competitive. You're competing with manufacturers for the same land, residential, so there is high need for land. But what the government came up as the policy was to land consolidate so that you have one common product or agricultural product that is being used in that sector. Two, because of the fluctuations of price, again, because of the high risks as the country in developing the trajectory, what they had to do was to introduce insurance, agricultural insurance that we're talking about. Now, this is where it becomes interesting. For the government, they're interested in food subsistence. You have enough food, people can get what they eat. From private sector, where Stephen sits, you need return on investment, you need the continuity of business and sustainability. But when you have the policymaker and the politician at the same time who has to convince the constituency so that you get your next term in the office, you have to come up with a way of balancing the scale. So insurance has come in here not necessarily to cover the profitability, but to allow you stay in the circulation so that you don't go away and you create instabilities, but also again you don't get a lot of profits. Lastly, what I remember of has been de-risking the agricultural sector so that you attract foreign investors that have come in, and has worked in a number of the areas in the country where you have now private sector investors participating in heavy investments, and they have reclaimed what we call wetlands. Initially, the wetlands were idle and they were being used on small-scale farmers, but now they have been fully commercialized in terms of agriculture, especially for rice producers, because that is the commodity that is heavily being consumed in not only in Rwanda, but I think in Africa. That is from Rwandan perspective. But globally, because today the world is connected, it's a global village, whether you want it or not. Those who probably came far from here, either you came by air or by road, I don't think you reached here without taking a bite of something. If it is by plane, by air, you had cabin services. And trust me, the food you are served, I don't think, if you looked at the portion, you may find 40% came from one country, 40% came from another country. If we put the total consumption that you took, 100% of it could have come from all the African countries. You are talking about water, you are talking about chocolate, you are talking about chili, everything on that table that you are eating could have come from different places. But those different places have different understanding and policies. We need to come up with a harmonized policy that is going to want to support all stakeholders. And when I'm talking about stakeholders here, let me talk from the sectors I'm talking about, private sector. Because the private sector, they are playing a big role in terms of production, in terms of job creation, in terms of research and innovation. If you look at the Brazil, I think they could be one of the countries which has 2 ministries of agriculture. And that tells you something. Why should a country like Brazil, large as it is, endowed with natural resources, have 2 ministries of agriculture? What is it that I have discovered that us we are not seeing? One, they have a ministry in charge of big commercial players and small players. To me, I would understand those 2 groups have different understanding. And they have totally 2 different goals. And one of them, if by luck disappear, then you have a failure on the other. So us, as the countries, almost of the similar endowed natural resources and factors, what is it that we can borrow from each other and then we work forward? 2, lastly, as African continent, we have seen so many policies, first either at AU level, the economic blocks level. At all these economic levels, we have some policies, we have some discussions, we have different paperwork that being done, but we don't see them coming to the implementation. How do we revisit these kind of initiatives and so that we can really benefit from what they intended to? Thank you, Tony. Next time, do it earlier.
Thank you so much, Stephen. Just before we take up a few questions from the audience, what I will then do is I'll give each and every panel member just some final thoughts, and then we can conclude. Wandile, any parting shots from your end?
So I think much of these, for me, have been captured by a range of comments that I see coming up. And I particularly liked Chris's insistence that no one is coming to save us. So we have to do something ourselves. And I think that links in part also with some of the remarks that were made by Innocent. But what I would leave the audience and perhaps maybe say we should be thinking about, I mean, look, much of the research that is coming out of ANAPRI, coming out of many of the organizations in the continent is solid. And of course, there's always an ongoing conversation about how much of the uptake of this by the various governments and the various private sector, and therefore how much impact are we all really making on changing things fundamentally on the ground. And then I think to see engagements then where there is this mix of people, government and the private sector, perhaps it plays as that platform for diffusion of ideas that can go in that way. But at the basic level, I do think that for a number of countries, we must be very clear about outlining some of the logistical or network industry region where investments must happen. I think it is one thing for us to discuss more on the agricultural side about how to improve farm productivity and all of those things. But if we don't deepen the research on the network industries that are supporting agriculture, I think that usually tends to be one of the major hindrances on a private sector investment. And of course, going back to also the old problems of land governance, if we are to, again, go back to the point from Uganda about how to attract capital to certain value chains in the sector. And I think issues of land governance are some of those things. And I think you yourself, for example, Stephen, when you're referring to some of these plots of land that you folks in Uganda, in Rwanda, were able to change and transform and commercialize, that involved a lot of improvement on land governance. And I think learnings like that and how do we replicate those in a number of the African countries is what will assist a great deal. I very much like, as my closing point, Saul, the point about harmonization also. And I say this then greedily sitting in South Africa because the issue of harmonization is what usually constrains us, Nancy, when we are trying to supply Kenya with some maize. having to do with whatever regulation is there. I'm using maize as just one aspect. But I think these are all things that we have to harmonize on the standards in order for us to be able to ensure that trade moves well. And I know in the FTAs, in the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, there's all of these broad things that we talk about and we celebrate that we've been able to do. But if you are from the private sector side, you quickly realize that there's still many of the constraints that are there. And I think we need to iron those out. And of course, I think that will enhance that intra-Africa trade. But very much network industries for me, so is one of the things that I think fundamentally constrain us, as well as the land governance. But very benefited a lot. So Tony, while you bullied me to join here, I ended up benefiting more. So I'm grateful. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Wandile. And please do stick around so that you can take up one or two questions. Chris? Any, final remarks, final thoughts from your end?
Yeah, I think just to double tap on the comment that was made that I think disruptions are now the norm. Like the only thing that we can expect is that our world will keep changing. Whether it's COVID, whether it's funding cuts, who knows what's going to happen in a few years' time. So I think we need to work on strengthening the resilience of our food systems. I think the real test for whether it's donors, African governments, or the private sector is really whether we can use this moment to restructure relationships from transactional to transformative. If funding cuts push us to do that, then I think that's great. To localize power, to align our efforts, to mobilize domestic and private capital to support our food systems, then this period of contraction might actually help build the foundations that we need for the resilience of Africa's food systems. And so ultimately, I think the resilience of our food systems will come not from more donor projects. It will come from shared investment in African markets, in the talent that we need on the continent, and investments in institutions. I think donors can help build the conditions for that to happen, but I think ownership must rest with the continent.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Just to capture the one or 2 points that I've learned from our deliberations yesterday. I think you've highlighted a key point, and I want to just to re-emphasize that. It's the fact that when we engage the political offices, it's important to provide options, right? If you are to drive efficiency and also uptake of the propositions that you are making, instead of just arriving at their office with one option, at least put 3 options, evidence-based. And in addition to that, also you highlighted the importance of us as policymakers, as academics, to understand and appreciate how the private sector or the public office works. They opt for decisions that are not necessarily 100%, economically correct, but the most popular decisions that they end up with. Nancy, maybe just from your end, just some final comments?
The final comments are just piggybacking on what my colleagues have said. As Africa, we need to maybe leverage on our Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement. We need to focus on trade, logistics, cold chain management, as a colleague has put it, networks, because you recognize that there's no African country that 100% relies on itself. We are getting our seed from South Africa. We are getting seed from Zambia. You're getting seed from Kenya. We need imports from Tanzania and from Uganda, from Ethiopia, to even meet our food security requirements. So in other words, it means we must start to appreciate that we trade with each other. We need each other. So it's for us to pull in our resources, see how we can improve our logistics and our management of transport, both water, air, and sea. As countries, look for ways we can innovatively finance our infrastructure in the region to help us leverage and expand our markets, because we then recognize that we must stand on our own 2 feet. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Innocent. Very brief, final thoughts, final comments?
So my final comments will be around two areas. The first is in the area of improving coordination between private, public, and development organizations. The truth is, none of us know each other well enough. We all assume that we know the other brackets well, and so we sit in our own comfort zones and we prescribe how the other group behaves, and it informs how we deal with them. I think we all need to get off our, in quote, our high horses and come to a central point where we trust each other enough, knowing that as Africans, we are in this together. We must progress together. The second one is something I touched on earlier on, markets. What we call food crops today can actually run through the exact same process that commercial crops run through that make them sustainably produced. The gentleman from Uganda asked the question around investment and said investment that was supposed to come into food crops, they actually come into cash crops like sugarcane and all of that. But if you have a market like the Indians are doing with the sugarcane, if in our countries we create strategic markets for food crops, it will follow the same process. And so people will stay with the food crops like they are doing with those cash crops. So market, market, market. Once the market is right, things will follow the market. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Innocent, with that, with some of your synergies and the importance of understanding what the markets are all about. Stephen, final comments as a host.
Thank you so much. I just have 3 comments. One, apply all the above as mentioned by my colleagues from the panel. 2, we need to invest or collaborate in innovations and research. 3, as private sector and the government, plus all stakeholders involved in agricultural fields, we have to come up with easy and sustainable financing. If all those 3 comments are done, I hope everyone will be happy. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Can we give the panel a big, big round of applause? I think you will tend to agree with me that this panel was quite robust and practical in terms of what they are proposing from a strategy perspective. Allow me now an opportunity to just open up the floor. I know we've got a few questions. Wandile, I hope you will be able to engage from your end. As you are taking up the mic, just a brief introduction, right, and the institution where you're coming from. It's important that when you are posing your question, let it be as straight as possible. Remember I told you that I'm a farmer, right? Make it straight and also indicate who you're directing the question. Thank you. Right over there in my colleague.
Yeah, thank you so much, moderator. Thank you, panelists, for discussions that were very insightful. My name is Josephat Makaga from Regional Center for Mapping of Resources for Development. My question is not on for a particular panelist, but whoever who feels that the seats were with the experience can answer. Youth in agriculture. As we've found out that Africa has got a huge youth population, and they are not involved in agriculture. And they are debating with the aging population that is weak, not energetic. What incentives are there to make the youth at least involved in technology so that as they consume, because they are the highest consumers, they are able also to contribute to what they consume? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Makaka.
Thank you, sir. Chair, MC, thanks to the panelists. My name is Bashasha. I'm from Uganda. My first question is to Mr. or Dr. Wandile. I liked your idea of commodity associations, but I'm a little bit worried they tend to leave out the smallholder farmers. So I would favor cooperatives rather than commodity associations. I wanted you to say whether I'm wrong or right, or whether they are the same thing. My next comment, Chair, through you, is to Innocent Okuku, who spoke very passionately. I liked that you came in after Nancy, because I think for me, I'm with Nancy rather than with you. The private sector is good, but in Africa, in some countries, the private sector is thin and slow, and we have a crisis. The soils are depleted, productivities are plummeting, we can't wait for the private sector. The public sector can come in, and the policies, all policies have benefits and costs. So we focused on the benefits versus the costs of the public intervention, and then I think the benefits will outweigh the costs initially. And then you private sector people can come on board along as we fine tune. So I'm declaring my biases. They are on the public sector intervention. Secondly, Innocent, the private sector has failed to address the adulteration issues in the inputs that you handle. I wanted you to speak to that. I have too many things. I think I need to speak to you over the tea break.
Yes, you're welcome to
thirdly and finally, Chair, again to Innocent, is it looks to me that the objectives of the private sector and those of the government are not incongruent. So until we have a convergence of objectives, I don't think we can dance together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. You can obviously innocently engage Innocent during the break. Okay. Luke, just over here, Luke, and then one more question there, and then we can just quickly engage.
Thank you very much. Luke Christensen from the World Bank. I want to pick up on one of the statistics that Abdi presented at the beginning, meaning the amount of spending on the agricultural sector. And one of the things we saw that spending on agriculture in Africa has been quite low. And if you look historically, that has even been the case over time, even when you compare with Asian countries when they were at similar levels of development. So my first question, given that spending on the agriculture, government spending on the agriculture sector is one key policy lever to get agriculture up, what's your view? Is Africa spending enough on agriculture? And if it isn't, according to you, why has that been the case? Over a sustained period of time. Some countries have done that. I think Rwanda, I think Ethiopia, there may be some others. Second, there is, of course, the fiscal constraint. We talk a lot about that. So even if you can't increase the spending, can we not spend much better? In your opinion, is it spending right? I think we had a debate on the input subsidies. Let's step aside from that. That's one part of the debate. It's an important part, but it's not the only thing that spending is going on. We talk extension, we talk research, we talk innovation. So is there not a big agenda for improving the efficiency of the little spending there is? And should that not be a higher priority in getting agriculture up?
Thank you very much, Luke. One more question.
Thanks, moderator. I think I want to build on the intervention before the last one, just to tap some knowledge from the panelists about...
Introduce yourself quickly.
Okay, thanks. I'm William Chadza from Malawi, from Mabata Institute. I wanted to get some perspective from the panelists about their experiences with regards to challenges on trust issues between the private sector and the public sector, so that we can move forward with this. That's one. Number two is how do we sustain honest dialogue between private sector and the public sector? And also, finally, what, from your perspective, are your expectations from policy research centers like these, the ANAPRI centers, in terms of contributing towards addressing this challenge of food systems transformation? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I just want to give the audience a chance. The very first question came from Makaka, is about youth incentivization, just to ensure that the youth fully participate. And then the innocent questions from Bashar, Bashar about a few questions about the involvement of the private sector in the agricultural sector. And then Luke, you talked about prioritization of spending, right? And in a nutshell, how best we can identify those alternatives. And then finally, from William Chancer, the policy direction, not their policy direction, but the expectations from your end, what these research institutes should do, and then the role of the private sector. Can I just maybe give Wandile a chance to engage any of those questions? Maybe can you take up the question of youth incentivization?
Yeah, Chair, I will be wide-ranging but brief. The first one on the youth, I'm not fully convinced, Chair, that the young people don't want to get into agriculture. I think what becomes clear is that if the sector doesn't display clearly the economic incentive, the young people are driven to areas where they see a better future for themselves. And I think if we begin to emphasize a lot the commercialization path and the value chain opportunities, we can see young people getting into the sector. And I'm saying this, of course, narrowly learning from the experience that I see in South Africa, but also looking at East Africa on some of these social media networks where I get to interact with a lot of kids from Nigeria, as well as on the East Africa part, where I see a lot more that are there. But I think if the economic value is emphasized, young people will go on that. And I do want to also just remark, and thanks for that point, Mr. Makaga. On Mr. Vasharpal's point, I mean, I think either it's a cooperative or commodity association, really any of that can work. The reason here in South Africa, we tend to think about the commodity association, which the chair himself in there, Saul, is engaged with some of those in Namibia, is because of the deep learning where we know that if this is a beef association, we will be able to address all things within that commodity. While if it's cooperative, where one person is doing beans and the other one is doing this, then the knowledge and the learning and the intervention gets to be scattered across a range of commodities. But we like to narrow it because we usually argue for the issues and address challenges that are affecting one commodity at a time. That's why we prefer that. But I think it differs environment by environment. Any of these would actually work. You know what, William, I wasn't going to speak this, but I'm from South Africa, where trust issues are not only about private sector and public sector, they are also about black people and white people and Indians. South Africa is this rainbow nation where trust is a big issue when it comes to that. And I'll tell you this, the only thing that we've been able to do in here, and Dr. Mato Kalaba is sitting to your left, just in front of Stephen. If you look to the right of Stephen, you will see him is sitting somewhere there. He has dreadlocks. He'll be able to address on this. But what we've been able to do is articulating very clearly what is necessary for South Africa and what would make everyone else better off. And then once the big vision is agreed upon, the way of delivering that, then we are able to assemble to say, in terms of the private sector, this is what can be done in there. In terms of the public sector, these are things that we think you should be addressing. So I think, Mr. Vashasha, you are being very hard on Innocent, saying private sector does these bad things. I really think it's about allocation of their responsibility, but at the starting point has to be an agreement on what is a broad vision for each country on actually articulating this. Let me close with Luke, and I have a meeting with you, Luke, in coming weeks. Luke, the thing about spending, I mean, you are right on that. It's very low, but I think what will be necessary, given the fiscal constraints that even Nancy talked about in Kenya, is really about prioritization of what's there. And again, I will lean in my own small country in South Africa that there's a lot of money that gets spent in agriculture, but the key issue where you sometimes don't see the results is about how that spending is managed. And that issue that you are raising, Luke, can be aligned again with with William's point about the prioritization. Once we know what are the priorities of the country, channel the small funding to that right area over a set period of time. And I think then we can be able to see the results. But we just have so little money and we want to do everything at the same time. And as a result, we tend to see very little results. At least that's my observation from where I sit. If I said anything that is wrong, Saul is one person that I work with, the chair there. Take it up with him at tea. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will also just email you some of the responses from the panels. Maybe just to conclude, any panel member just taking up the questions? Innocent?
Yeah, I think it would be a crime not for me to not take up some of the questions, given that most of the questions were specifically shot at me, right? So even though I have a shield. So I think a thread that cuts across most of the questions is the misconception about the difference in interest between public and private sector. There is a notion that private sector is interested in quick wins, immediate profit, and do not care about what happens in the future. Well, if you do business as government officials with briefcase business people, so you're a politician, you get elected into office, you call your friend who didn't do anything about fertilizer before, and you give him a contract to supply the country's need of fertilizer. Yes, you'll be there 1 year, and it's not there next year. But if you find someone who's invested billions, millions of dollars, I mean, take for example, Dangote has a plant in Nigeria that is $5.2 billion. Returns on that does not come back in 5, in 10 years fully. So he cannot have an interest in a quick profit that will destroy the market for the future. So I think we need to understand that there is a place of common interest, which is the long-term good life for all of our people and for the sector. This is why I said we assume that we know each other, but we don't know each other enough yet. We need to get into the room together, public sector, private sector, and let's talk. We'll suddenly find out that we actually have common interest. What is at risk is that we take a decision for a 1-year intervention that destroys investment that have been building over the years. Let's say you take a subsidy decision that allows private sector to pack its business and get out of the country in 1 year. If they've been there 15 years, they've built some local capacity, they've built a system, that whole system is lost. You go back to 10 years back. So it's always very valuable to speak. I believe there are common interests that we need to explore together. ANAPRI, we started this conversation already, ANAPRI and the network. What's your role? Now, one of the things we're doing at the fertilizer industry group is to say, let's work with the ANAPRI and ANAPRI centers to do the kind of research that will generate the kind of data that will help policymakers to take the right kind of direction with policies that will be friendly to both the public and the private sector, in quote. There has to be a place where the environment is good for all of us to work together on a long-term basis, right? Luke's question, I think if we put the small money that we have in creating consistent, sustainable markets. So, for example, a lot of the product that USDA uses to do commodity exchange, to support programs that we're quoting on the continent, is product coming from what you call strategic reserves. Excess output of farmers that is bought and kept. So there is nothing stopping African countries from doing that. And when you do that, the money is not lost. It's actually not a sink. It's money that recycles. Because when prices are high, you pump it into the market, you get the money back. Next year, you mop up excess. So you keep prices high, and you keep the system running. So we can talk a bit more about many of the questions. But here, we are together. Together, we will deliver Africa from school food insufficiency. Thank you.
So, Chair, allow me 1 minute just to answer Luke's question.
Yes.
So we have, I stated earlier, we have done some expenditure and financial reform process. For the agriculture sector, what we have done is first we have registered all our farmers. We have a database that has put together 7 million farmers, and we know where they are, what they are producing, their land sizes, the amount of livestock. And this is what we have used to enable us distribute our subsidies. So even when we provide a subsidy on price for fertilizer, we give it through an e-voucher system. So you get an SMS as a farmer telling you to redeem a certain amount of fertilizer for the value chain that you are interested in. If it is maize, we know you have put in the database that you have maybe 2 acres. So the system does compute for you how much fertilizer you need for, and which fertilizer you do need for the crop that you're growing. And it's done purely on a e-voucher system, a digital platform. And that is one of the reforms that will help us use the little resources that we have more efficiently. So we are extending that not only for the crops, but we want to introduce it for the livestock sector also, where then the farmers can redeem their vouchers for vaccination. Remember, for livestock, we are having three-pronged approach. We want to improve nutrition, genetics, and health. And by health, we want to achieve 100% vaccination. So we are putting all those services and that we are providing to farmers on a digital platform so that we have sight. We already have sight of who our client is, and therefore it enables us to better plan. So I think that those are some of the success stories we have in terms of use of budget efficiently that we have. And going forward, we are seeking to expand in the same thread. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Chris, any response? And then finally, Stephen, once again, I'll give it to you just to close. You can summarize what the other said. Thanks.
Well, I was going to just plus one to what the other panelists have said. But I think just to add to Wandele's point about youth involvement in agriculture, we don't need to convince young people to get involved in agriculture. If we can guarantee that a young person getting involved in agriculture will get them that iPhone 17, they're convincing, they'll do it. And so let's change the economics, let's change the narrative around agriculture from this struggle to something that makes business sense.
Thank you very much, Stephen.
And thank you so much. I will take on the issue of youth and the trust between private sector and government institutions. I'm interested in youth because at one stage in my life, I was a young person with the vigor, with the controversies, with everything. Basically, you're aggressive. And if you don't manage that strength, that motivation, you are the risk that is very heavy. So borrowing from what Rwanda is doing in terms of organizing youth, you can organize them either through cooperatives or collective investment companies. And then it's easy to give out the incentives that are profitable. From here, what they have done, the veterans that I was talking about, after organizing them in groups, collective investment companies and cooperatives, they were given out the land. And it is easy now to dish out the fertilizers, the financial support, and all other agricultural inputs that you can give. Otherwise, if you leave youth scattered, they will be interested in different areas, and then they will have the issue of trust again. Trust is a big challenge. Government and private sector don't need to be competitors, because at the end of the day, you're working for one goal. From here, what we have realized is that we need to understand each other, because if you stay on the other side of the table, you have what you are not comfortable with. I have what is not comfortable with me. If I'm a private sector investor and I have a 10-year projection for investment, and I'm basing on a policy, a government policy, before I even break the ground for the investment, then the policy has changed. That creates uncertainties and disruptions. So what we have come up with as a formation of dialoguing all these challenges, we formed what is called PPDs, public-private dialogues, across all the sectors. So you discuss policy issues, you discuss initiatives, you discuss investment opportunities, and here you can share. At times you lock the door and you hit each other verbally, because you have what it takes to convince the other. Lastly, there are countries which have involved private sector from the word go, and they have successfully done it. If you go to Kenya, the biggest players in agricultural fields sectors is private sector. If you go to other countries, they are private sector. I'm not saying the government is not doing the big part, but at the end of the day, if we keep doing the blame game, then we shall find ourselves on the same point of where we started from. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Stephen. With that, can we give the audience, including Wandile, a big round of... I'm just informed that we are out of time, unfortunately or fortunately, depending on how you're looking at it. So the panel members are at your disposal. They are around if you want to engage them and for discussions. So finally, I just want to invite Zena, basically just to give us a brief summary, briefly, on the way forward. And then thereafter we'll have a photo session, and then we conclude the session. Thank you. Zena, over to you.
Yes, good morning. My name is Zena Mpenda from Sokoine University of Agriculture, Tanzania. Moderator, the panel and the presentation has been great. It's very difficult. I found it very difficult to summarize. So I will skip most of the part, and because of time, I'll just address some few things. Yeah. So please bear with me. This is what I've managed to capture, but I know there's a lot. Just to quickly look at the global disruption in Africa, we agreed that there's a lot of discussion, so we know the disruptions, but then we need to appreciate the outcomes, yeah, that they are staggering outcomes. Some of these outcomes are short-lived, some of them are long-lived, so we need to see how to address depending on the outcome. We also saw that government, they take different initiatives to address these disruptions. And we, based on the presentation from Ali, we saw two areas that have been looked at: the government expenditure in agriculture, but also we saw contribution from the donor society, the development flows. Yeah. But we also see that the development flows are declining, so we need to take some initiatives. And then we ask ourselves, why is it not that we do perform despite the efforts? And we saw that there are some conflicting interests. For the government, they have nutritional issues to address. At the same time, they have got the climate issues. There is how to sustain production while they are depending on smallholder farmers. So those are the conflicting issues to handle. So they need to be looked at. So we also, from the panelists, I'm saying I'm just going fast because of time. For the panelists, I've tried to group them based on their categories, those from the government, from the private sector, and from the donor community. And starting from the government, they show evidence from their experience on what the government are doing during disruptions. And from there, starting from Kenya, we have to agree that all African countries are the same. So we are faced with the same challenges, and we try to address them in similar ways. So we realize that there's no one strategy that fits all. We need a combination of strategies to be able to solve our challenges. Examples of the subsidies and how are supposed to be handled or were handled. We also see the need to have a national infrastructure in place so that they can boost the economy in general. In short, we need to have a cocktail of initiatives to be able to meet some of these national objectives. We also, from the government, we kind of say we need to understand the disruptions that they are also different and they bring different outcome. So we need to have some plans. At the same time, we need to be able to balance between development plans and politics, because the government also needs to stay in politics, but at the same time they need to address some development issues. At the same time, we have the private sector that they are also interested in looking at profits. They also need to appreciate that the food consumed in one nation comes from various countries. So there is a need of harmonizing these countries to be able to understand from one another and be able to appreciate that they depend on one another. So to identify what they can learn and improve from one another to be able to have an improvement in agriculture. From the private sector, it was very interesting. I could also capture some few points. One of it is to make sure that robust infrastructure are required, and we can have strong associations, strong crop boards that can be able to ensure that the farmers have got a say. They can decide on what they need in terms of investment. We also need to have think tanks that can assist these associations to understand their needs clearly and be able to prioritize them. We can have boards that brings together researchers, private sector and government, try to look at what is necessary and what can need to be done. We also look at the fragmented infrastructure and try to bring them and try to build them. Yeah. We also have to agree that we have a conducive but practical. We need to have a conducive but a practical environment. An example of the subsidy was given. A subsidy can help in one part, but it can be destructive in another party. So we need to have conducive environment, but also practical that can benefit both parties. So the need for government and private sector to sit together and come up with workable strategies. Then create the right financing for agriculture that is affordable, but then Africa should take responsibility to address their own challenges, because if you leave it to other parties, it might not address what you need to address. And from the government, from the donor perspective, we need to rethink around, move from doing more to do it better because of the financial issues, and then try to look what is the role of the donor, understand what they want to do now. So, for example, now they're moving from grants to engage private sector to finance. That means moving to philanthropists to finance some of these initiatives. Okay, thank you. Then the last part, what are the areas for the policy? They talk about harmonization of policy and regulations across Africa, see how to provide policy recommendations with options. That is critical. But then they need to stipulate clearly the benefit of sector that can attract youth, for example. Need to accept that the private sector and public sector need to sit together and understand one another. Because they've got different and contradictory objectives. So they have to sit together to understand one another. For the researchers, research direction engagement with key stakeholders, they need to identify their key roles, how much is taken up by private sector.
I'm given an give Nancy, not Nancy, but Zenda. Just a big round of applause. So thank you. We can just now have a photo session with the panel members, and then we'll then come to the end of this session. Thank you so much for being a lively audience. Wandile, thank you once again. Next time we will make sure that you are around when we engage, so that you are in person. Thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Yes.
Ali, you can go for the photo session as well. Colleagues, as we prepare to wrap up this session, I'll do a quick housekeeping announcement. I'll just let this photo session quickly conclude. Round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much. Colleagues, we are running a little bit behind time. So I am going to ask if we could be back in the room around 11:20, so that we can also move to the next session quickly. So we can adjourn for tea and then try to be back by 11:20. So that is, yeah, like a quick 10-minute break. Thank you.
Bring my beans.
Mo grupung there are 6 of you. So none of the 6 can debate this group. Lonale can respond here. If it's a different group, you can.
Yeah, Speaker, neker mabane your list. Neker list jaka ne ntse mabane. Ene isa rtsenya so hari kwadisa to debate. Ne re libile list ya mabane eneng isa rtsenya rona. Ne re sa tsengwa this order paper e dula bosigo e supa gore re taborile mo listing tsa tsieno. So ne re seyo mabane.
Rawo kenewend. Agere so sibuang ora gore you will debate for group 1. Mo tsene di tsahela za group 1. Yes, that's coming. That is coming in the afternoon, this afternoon. Work health, child welfare, and basic education.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker.
Get on it.
Me ke tlhalose maabane ga re budiwa gore go batla go debate ne le mo di issue tsa youth tsa transport le justice. Yaano ke tsone tse leng gore tota ha re kopa go debate ne re itebagantse le group e neng le gore ha order paper e dule maabane ene sa re tsenya mo go yone. Ye order paper ene ngi supa gore ra presenta this morning e dule bosigo re una re sa bolo go ikwadisetsa tse neng di listilwe previously, Mr. Speaker.
Hang on, Honourable Minister. Honourable Minister, remember that the order paper is just if I may put it that way. The timetable which was shared at the time when you were having a seminar, that is what the order paper is following. So, for group 1, We had Ministry of State President, Finance, International Relations, Health. But Health didn't present, so they will present as together with Child Welfare and Basic Education. Lands and Agriculture also presented. So this is Group 1. Now let's go to Group 2. Group 2, Youth and Gender Affairs, Transport and Infrastructure, Justice and Correctional Services, Local Government and Traditional Affairs, Minerals and Energy, Communications and Innovation. So, since we would have had all the ministers present, but because of shortage of time, we had Transport and Infrastructure, Justice and Correctional Services, Youth and Gender, Local Government and Traditional Affairs, Minerals and Energy, and Communications and Innovation. So, because of time, but otherwise, Ngabedi continue as Group 2. So the point I'm making is that Lonaba Group 2, you can debate Group 1 or Group 3. You can't debate Group 2. It clear? Jano, Kirauri,
Mr. Speaker.
Honorable Shimamana, followed by
Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker.
Oral Minister of Labor and Home Affairs.
Thank you, Mungam. Nani ke batla go sa istala go le go nyenyane. Go re ha re le mo group re le mo group go re le 5 se. Ya ka re le 6 ya. Me nna ke be ke batla gore ke batla go akgela mo dineng tse tharo not mo go ya me. Ka re ya me ka be ke setse ke
to funding cuts from donors, it's not available. So what we need to do is we need to strengthen how we ourselves as African can invest in the ag sector so that we are able to achieve a triple back effect. I just want to say that these are the strategic objectives and what we need to do. In doing so, we have developed what we call
objective, where we hope that all of us as participants would come to appreciate what CADAP 3.0 is about, and he has elaborated that very well. Please stay on, because we will have a Q&A session, and we will really want to engage you. At this point, because we've heard what CADIP is all about, what we anticipate to do from 2026 to 2035, I want now to invite panelists who will help us see where we are going to plug in as individuals, as institutions, governments, the private sector, the donor agencies. We want to discuss a little bit more on that. Now, I have a very big panel, so you bear with me. But I think the best thing is to have everyone here so that we don't keep moving back and forth. So we have 4 sets of panelists, all very important. And so we'll have all of them here. We have a category that we are referring to as the Institutional Memory Cluster. And there we have Dr. Godfrey Bahigwa. Please come to this podium. Anywhere. Where you want to sit in the middle? Wherever you choose to sit. Next, we have Mr. Hussein Mohammed Aden from IGAD. Is he available online? No. Okay. Bahigwa, you have so many minutes to tell us a lot about CADIP. Okay. The next set of panelists is from the policy think tanks, and we have 2 there. We have Dr. Jebidia from ISRABAM. I think he's here. Yes, please, you're welcome. He will be speaking in French, so please be ready for that. Then we have Mr. Francis Halle from FANPAM. Welcome. Then we have the public sector. We have government representatives from DRC. I think she's online, yeah? Yes, DRC. She'll be participating online. A representative from Ethiopia. Yes, you're welcome. Representative from Malawi. I'll be telling you their names later. Malawi. Yes. Finally, we have the donor and cooperating partners. We have Jeffrey from GIZ and Saji, Dr. Saji from the World Bank. Yes, thank you. So this session is long. Oh, please come and sit here. We'll figure out what I'll do. I think I can do it from here. Our team is bringing me a chair. No, I think I'll hinder him. Okay, let's figure out what we do here. So, maybe that's better. So we have a full set of panelists. And I want to introduce them all at once so that when it comes to the question time or their interventions, we don't waste any time. So Dr. Bahigwa, when I mention your name, because not everyone knows, please raise your hand so that they know who I'm speaking about. Bahigwa is raising both hands. He's a former director for Agriculture and Rural Development at the African Union Commission, where he was leading programs that advance agricultural transformation under Agenda 2063. He has over 20 years of experience. He has worked with national and international organizations, government, research institutions, and he is a strong advocate for research and evidence. I have left out a lot more. You can find out. Next. Next is Dr. J.B. Dia. Yes, he's a geographer and senior researcher at the Bureau of Macroeconomic Analysis, BAM, within ISRA. He has been a director of ISRA BAM, and he has led research and rural transformation, market geography, and spatial planning. And he's well positioned to speak about the things that we are discussing today. Next, we have Francis Halle. Yes, I like you're putting up both hands. That's good. He's the Director for Policy, Advocacy, and Communications at FANPAN. He's a seasoned development and communications expert. He designs and implements advocacy and knowledge management strategies that bridge research and policy communities. There's a lot more, but he'll be helping us communicate here. Thank you very much. Next, online, we have Mwali Efifani. She is from the Ministry of Agriculture from DRC. She serves as an environmental and social safeguard expert, and within her area of human resource management, she supports the integration of environmental and social standards into national agricultural programs. So she'll be sharing experience from DRC. Thank you very much. We can see you and we are happy that you are online. Next, we have Dr. Desalegn Begna from Ethiopia. He's a lead researcher and assistant professor of animal genetics and breeding in Agriculture and Rural Development Policy Research Center in the Policy Study Institute in Ethiopia. Welcome. And next we have Doshani Kadokera. You have broken the protocol. It's 2 hands up. Thank you. He's the chief economist in the Department of Agriculture Planning and Services under Malawi's Ministry of Agriculture. He serves as the government coordinator for African Risk Capacity and national project coordinator for the African Disaster Risk Financing Program. A lot more, please check out that, but we are happy that you're here. Okay, my task is not just reading this, but I need to read. Next, we have Jeffrey Ngari. Thank you for following protocol. He is a policy and technical advisor with GIZ. He has over 8 years of experience in international development cooperation, and he's been supporting public policy design and implementation in the agri-food sector at national and subnational levels. He's currently serving with GIZ in a program in Kenya, which is implemented in partnership with Kenya's Ministry of Agriculture and Livestock. Welcome. Last but not least, we have Dr. Saji Zoya. Thank you. He is the lead agriculture economist for the World Bank's Europe and Central Asia region, and he's also the global lead for public policy and expenditures in the Agriculture and Food Department. He spearheads efforts to repurpose agricultural support towards sustainable food systems. So I haven't done justice in introducing all of you. So at break time, please say a little more about you, yourself, and how this you support the CADI process. Now let me start with Godfrey. Had 15 minutes for your session, but I can take away a few because we are already behind schedule. But Godfrey, I have already mentioned that you are former Director of Agriculture and Rural Development at AUC. And what we want to learn from you is your institutional experience. You've spent a lot of time there. Based on your experience, what have we learned from CADAP 1.0 and 2.0 that must be done differently under CADAP 3.0?
Yes, thank you, moderator. Let me start by not accusing Anthony to take me out of retirement. I retired at the end of April this year, so now I'm a private citizen, but he was able to cajole me out of there, like he did others. Let me also say, Bashasha from Uganda should not ask me questions because he asks tough questions. I thank Kennedy, the African Union, for that introductory presentation that gave you a sense of what the agenda for the continent is going to be for the next 10 years, starting January 2026. So when you ask me to talk about, to give my ideas about the institutional memory, it makes me feel old. It's only 6 months ago that I left the organization. I was part of the team that actually led the formulation of that 10-year strategy and action plan. So if you succeed in its implementation, I will take credit. If you fail, it is your fault. Having said that, I think I'll make maybe three points. Looking at CADAP 1, for those that are not familiar, CADAP 1.0, that is the Maputo Declaration that ran from 2003 to 2014. What they are describing as CADAP 2.0 is the Malabo Declaration 2015-2025, and then CADAP 3.0 is the Kampala Declaration that will run from 2026 to 2035. Just for clarity about what is 1.0 to 2.0 and 3.0. Looking at the previous two declarations, Maputo and Malabo, and what must be done differently, I think I'll give 3 points. The first one is about the need to domesticate Kampala early enough. For Maputo, because CADAP was new in 2003, there was a lot of interest and enthusiasm, as well as resources that were made available to support the continental organizations, the African Union, ANAPRI, the regional economic communities. And so I think at the last count, there were, I think, 47 countries that had domesticated CADAP 1.0 into national agriculture investment plans. When you look at Malabo, we did not have as much success. The resources that had been mobilized for Maputo, we are not fortunate enough to repeat that success of having adequate resources for continental organizations, support countries. So domestication became a challenge. It was done piecemeal. So I think what I'm picking from for Kampala is the need to have added domestication of the declaration into national agri-food systems investment plans, so that countries start to implement those commitments at national level. If we leave it to chance, the success will be limited. And also, it seems the responsibility seems to fall on the AU Commission, ANAPRI, and the regional economic communities. But these institutions are constrained, both in terms of financial and human resources, to be able to drive this effort
alone. But also we observe that demand for domestication is not automatic. You would think that after the member states adopted the Kampala Declaration, they would all run back, call cabinet meetings, tell them about the Kampala Declaration, and give instructions that you must domesticate these into action plans. You would think that would happen. In reality, it doesn't happen like that. They simply move on to the next summit or the next meeting. And so the burden falls on the AU Commission, ODA, NEPAD, working with regional economic communities to ensure that this domestication takes place. But they need to be supported. Now, before I left the organization, I had proposed, and I hope really this proposal will gain traction. In order to have as many countries as possible domesticate the Kampala Declaration into national ag investment plans, we should have shared partnerships and responsibilities. I'm using those words carefully. Shared partnerships and shared responsibilities under the guidance of the AU Commission and ODA NEPAD. Now, we have different partners across the continent that I think if they buy into this idea, we can have many countries domesticate Kampala as soon as possible. FAO is present in 47 of our member states, from Monday to Sunday. AGRA works in 16 countries on this continent. IFAD has projects in 46 of the 46 countries on the continent. The World Bank has offices in 39 African countries. WFP operates in more than 40 countries on this continent. So if the AU Commission and ODA NEPAD can mobilize, and plus others, by the way, GIZ and others, if you can mobilize these partners and have a frank conversation and say, can we partner and work together using your presence at country level? Your interactions and partnerships are built with the ministries of agriculture and other ministries that are going to be part of food systems transformation. Can we work together, mobilize these resources, and actually domesticate Kampala as soon as possible? I believe if this conversation can be had through division of labor, we can have as many as 40 plus countries domesticate Kampala in the first 2 years from January next year. I hope this proposal can be looked into, but having talked to some of these partners, there is goodwill to support the domestication. So I hope that can take place. But there has to be leadership by AUC and ODA NEPAD to mobilize these partners and have that conversation. The second point that I want to make, again learning from Maputo and Malabo, sorry. One of the big successes, especially during the Malabo era, was for us to develop a robust monitoring and reporting mechanism around CADAP implementation. This is through the CADAP biannual review mechanism, where we religiously produced a continental report on the progress that countries were making in the implementation of the 7 Malabo commitments. We started in 2017, and the last report just got presented to ministers just this past month. And we'll go to the assembly in January or February next year. Over time, the coverage and the quality of that report has improved, and we are very proud to have it as a product that reports on progress produced by African experts across the continent. Not just at the AU Commission or ODA NEPAD. We have mobilized African experts, young men and women, that support the two organizations produce this report every 2 years. So that is a success. But what needs to, going forward, what needs to happen is to improve the utilization of that report. That report is very rich, and I mean it is very, very rich, but its utility is limited. The countries seem to, they collect the data, do some analysis, then submit to regional economic communities, then to the AU Commission, we compile the continental report. They seem to be happy to say, okay, we have now submitted to the African Union what they asked us to do. But that report is really meant for countries to examine their own performance, because we produce country scorecards that show how they perform against each of the commitments. So going forward, because in the declaration, Kampala declaration, it was agreed that the same mechanism for monitoring and reporting will continue, but utilization of that report to inform discussions, to inform policy choices, to inform investments is greatly needed going forward. The third and last point that I want to talk about, again learning from Maputo and Malabo, is the need for, and I think this is the last point that, the second last point that Kennedy talked about, that we emphasize in that 10-year strategy and action plan, and that is improved governance of agri-food systems on the continent. Like I said earlier, Maputo came on board, everybody was excited because it was a new mechanism for agri-transformation on the continent, but also there were incentives that were created, including one instrument by the World Bank, GAFSP, the Global Agriculture Food Security Program, where countries would actually access resources to invest in specific areas out of the national agriculture investment plans. So countries were excited about that. So not only was it new, but there were financial instruments that would augment domestic resources where they were insufficient. In 2.0, we do not have such an instrument. So I'm thinking that if Kampala is going to succeed, we need to re-examine that environment of financing. Yes, we are talking about increasing domestic resource mobilization, but we know the reality of it, that there will still be gaps experienced by countries even after mobilizing domestic resources. So can we have the international financial institutions, even the Continental and Africa Development Bank, the World Bank and others, think about having financial instruments that countries can access to supplement the domestic resources gaps that they may have. I think it would inject additional interest and drive at country level. Lastly, political will, where we see, we have observed over the last decade in the implementation of Malabo, countries where either the Prime Minister or the President are deeply interested in seeing agri-transformation, they have made more progress than those countries where there is lackluster political interest in the sector. So we are hoping that going forward for Kampala, heads of state and government, prime ministers can pick interest and provide that political leadership that is needed to stimulate action at country level. Let me stop there for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Godfrey. You have a wealth of experience. 6 months since you left, but we'll still be talking to you as we implement the 3.0. Now, I want to move to the policy think tanks and prepare yourself. I said Dr. Jebidia will be speaking in French, and I'm now going to direct a question to him and Mr. Francis Hale. As you prepare, let me ask Francis to respond before Dr. Dia. And the question surrounds evidence. So both of you, I would like you to answer the question, what has worked in translating evidence into actionable policy at the national level? What has worked in translating evidence into actionable policy at the national level? 2 minutes maybe, because I have another question for you also.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Yeah. I know that the currency is evidence, but what has worked is probably the value chain towards evidence. The first thing that I have seen work, not the evidence itself, is the relationships. We have been individual actors on the continent, and we have started finding each other because we realize we are working on one thing, and I call that the power of the constituency. So as a generator of evidence, as analysts, as people generating outputs, we have come together and seem to be talking to the policymaker with not yet one voice, but getting close to that. So I think a choir would make more sound than different people. Different people can make noise, but if they are not coordinated, it is discord. So it's very difficult to follow what this one is saying and the other one and that. So in the building of relationships, we have seen the birth of coalitions that speak with one voice. And if you are a member of ANAPRI, it would be 16, 20 institutions out of 1,000, 2,000 on the continent. So if we are building evidence and the voice that goes behind whatever we are advocating for, we need that much, 2,000, 3,000 other institutions to bring their evidence behind, and we do that. So, like I said, what has worked, the first thing is not the evidence itself. Because if we go to evidence, we now look at what did we do for climate change? Did we generate African evidence and give it to our policymakers? Did we generate evidence on vulnerability, food insecurity, and give it to our policymakers? That's the second part. We have been doing that for the longest time, but it has not been working because we have not been speaking with the same voice. And then the second thing has been, how do we use the evidence itself? Us on the supply side as research institutions, as analysts and everything. And how is the evidence received by our policymakers? Do they have the capacity to use, to appreciate, to know what the evidence is? So even before we go to the evidence itself, the building of capacity for us to be able to understand this evidence or to know that we need the evidence has been a major area of work, and that has worked. You will appreciate that as ANAPRI and the institutions that come here, you have a certain skill that does not exist out there. We sit here with a former director, but as soon as he leaves that environment and he joins politics, I hope you don't, he will suddenly start behaving like a totally different animal. The love of evidence that was talked about here will disappear, and but it's not because he loses it. It's because the decision maker at that level has other things that work other than evidence. So, in short, she said 2 minutes. I really think that it's running too far ahead to say what have we done in terms of evidence, because that is readily available. I can pick policy briefs, I can do this, I can do that. But if you are throwing them out into the air and no one is looking at them because they have no capacity for them, or they have no need for them, or we just came up with our own area of research and then shove it down the director's throat at African Union, it becomes a totally different ballgame discussing what has worked and what has not. So yes, it's the building of relationships amongst ourselves, and we still have a long way to go, I must say, Anthony, and building of capacity amongst ourselves, doing these research reports that talk to us as a special species and don't cut across to the ones who need them. we have a lot to do there. So the next is let's extend our hands to build capacity in the ones that need to use the evidence. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, Francis. I want to pose the same question to Jebi. What has worked in translating evidence into actionable policy at the national level?
Merci beaucoup, merci. Je pense que c'est une question intéressante. Mais je pense que le premier problème que nous avons, c'est d'abord même de créer ces données, avec des problèmes sur la collecte. Dans nos pays, pour le Sénégal que je connais bien, je pense que la collecte des données a posé un problème en termes de renouvellement. On peut avoir les données sur une période d'exécution du PDDA, mais plus tard, ce sont des données qu'il va falloir renouveler. Aujourd'hui, dans le pays que je connais, on a eu des données qui méritent d'être renouvelées, et pour le moment, il n'y a pas de dispositions financières qui permettent de collecter ces données et de les analyser. Donc, un premier problème consiste à collecter ces données assez régulièrement pour permettre aux décideurs de prendre les meilleures décisions. Un autre problème que nous avons peut-être connu, c'est comment fédérer, en tout cas, des institutions de recherche pour mieux analyser ces données. Parce que toutes les institutions ne sont pas habilitées à faire ce type d'analyse de données. Au Sénégal, on avait démarré un peu avec ce qu'on appelait un réseau d'analyse des politiques agricoles. Mais malheureusement aussi, il y a peut-être parmi nous institutions de recherche, think tank ou autres, qui sont habilités à analyser ces données. Il y a parfois de l'ego qui fait que les institutions ne peuvent pas se coordonner et travailler ensemble pour collecter, analyser, traiter et donner la meilleure décision aux décideurs. Donc, ces initiatives ont un peu été coupées à un moment donné, et je pense que dans la partie CADEP 3.0, il faut peut-être beaucoup discuter sur comment échanger, encourager la recherche-action, le partenariat avec les universités, les think tanks, mais aussi une partie de l'administration publique centrale qui gère aussi ces données pour qu'il y ait de meilleures analyses. Et aussi, il y a une question de redevabilité, parce que les données qu'on collecte, il faut les faire parler pour que les décideurs publics puissent les utiliser dans le meilleur des cas et pouvoir suivre un peu les recommandations du CADEP. Ce sont en tout cas les premières impressions que ça me donne sur cet aspect. Voilà. Comme j'ai juste 2 minutes.
Thank you very much, dear on point. And I want to move to the next category of panelists, but I might come back to you with follow-up questions if time allows, so just be alert. So let's now turn to the public sector, and I will pose a question. Okay, let me first, I think in this session, I would want to deal with a few questions for each of the countries and see how that goes. If time allows, we'll get back to other discussions. But for now, I want to bring on board Ms. Efifani Mwali. I hope you're still there. Can you hear us? Oh, sorry, and she's speaking
Yes, I can hear you. Hello.
Yes.
Bonjour. I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. So please get ready for her response. But my question to you is, Many countries face challenges in translating continental commitments into coherent national action, and that's what we are speaking about here. Would you share with us what have been the main institutional or governance barriers in your country that have slowed progress in domesticating and implementing the CAADP agenda? Over to you, Epifani.
Okay, merci beaucoup pour la parole. Merci pour cette opportunité. Par rapport à notre pays, les obstacles que nous avons rencontrés ou défis sont d'abord la fragmentation institutionnelle, car on a eu beaucoup d'acteurs au fait qui interviennent dans les secteurs. C'est-à-dire on a beaucoup de ministères comme le ministère de l'Agriculture, Pêche et Élevage. Peut-être dans d'autres pays, c'est regroupé en un seul département, mais le nôtre, au contraire, c'est vraiment segmenté. C'est segmenté et qui fait qu'il n'y ait pas de cadre unifié efficace pour vraiment coordonner tout ce qui est implémentation de tout ce qui est PDDA. Et aussi, nous avons eu le problème de faible appropriation du cadre PDDA 2.0 par rapport à la mise en œuvre de notre plan national d'investissement agricole, qui a été en souffrance dû aux faibles capacités. Sorry. Là, vous me voyez? C'est bon? Allô? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can see you and hear you.
Yes. Okay. Et aussi, nous avons eu la faible mise en œuvre du plan national d'investissement agricole, qui a souffert vraiment de faibles capacités techniques et des financements extérieurs fragmentés, dû bien sûr à cette séparation d'intervenants dans les secteurs. Et aussi, notre gouvernement était un peu, je peux dire, bon, il y a une faible structuration avant 2023, donc parce qu'il n'existait aucun conseil de pilotage de l'agriculture et de l'alimentation au niveau national qui existe maintenant. Et nous avons vraiment cette ferme conviction que cela va vraiment aider à l'implémentation du cadre du PDDA 3.0. Donc, merci.
Thank you very much. Epifani, I have a follow-up question. You have mentioned that institutional fragmentation has been an issue as well as technical capacity. So you have indicated to us what your country is doing to deal with that fragmented institutional infrastructure. But would you kindly tell us, what are you doing to be able to build technical capacity to ensure that the agricultural priorities aligned with CAADP 3.0 will be effectively implemented?
Ok, donc déjà le gouvernement à son plan a engagé une mise en place d'un pacte national de l'agriculture et l'alimentation qui aide à ce que tous les intervenants du secteur, que ce soit le ministère et les institutions, les tierces parties comme les investisseurs et tout ce qui est actionnaire dans le secteur agricole, soient en mesure de travailler ensemble. Donc, cela va nous avancer. Et aussi, nous au niveau du ministère de l'Agriculture, nous avons passé à une forme de budgétisation par programme. Sorry. Donc, ce qui permet à ce que non seulement qu'il y ait un suivi appuyé ou un suivi et évaluation de tout ce qui est projet, de toute intervention agricole dans les secteurs, mais aussi pour qu'on ait vraiment de résultats tangibles en termes d'intervention et en termes d'investissement qui se font déjà sur le terrain. Aussi de ramener au fait cette tangibilité de résultats sur le plan national. Merci.
Thank you very much, Epifani. Please stay on. We may have follow-up questions, or the plenary may have questions later. Let's now turn to Ethiopia.
Thank you.
We already heard that Ethiopia is progressing well, doing well, and you've renewed momentum in agricultural transformation. So my question to you, Begna, is what key policy shifts or institutional reforms or leadership decisions do you believe have been central to Ethiopia's recent turnaround in implementing its agricultural agenda? 2 minutes, please.
Thank you very much. I'm very much honored to be here and also explain the position of my country in these two questions. The key policy shifts in agriculture areas, particularly when we talk of agriculture in the crop sector as well as in the livestock sector in our country context, something which is different from the previous speaker is we are completely presenting a complaint which is research-based, evidence-based, that an institution is lacking in our case. It's not a fragment, but an institution is lacking. Here, most of the development policies are focused on crop-based, and largely the livestock sector is forgotten in terms of policy. This is evidence research policy based what I'm talking. And in this case, still we are appealing to government that livestock should be a ministry, because the country is endowed with large number of livestock. And according to the data, the country stood first from Africa. And then when we have that almost a 10 million population, we don't have a policy for livestock. And it is merged with crop. And the development is completely based on crop development. And this, although these constraints are prevailing, still the government is trying to or striving to shift the policy. For example, the agriculture development led industrialization is one of the big policies that has shifted the agriculture development of the country by involving many private sector and development partners. And 10 years development plan is also focusing on agriculture development, mainly focusing agriculture development, which is including all the sector development, agriculture sector. So there is a shift in focus from rain-fed agriculture to irrigation-based. And I hope all probably you may have an information that the country it's self-sufficient in wheat production and they started exporting. And also there are CAADP-based policies, declarations developed by the Ethiopian government, and also changed in structure, which is led from, starting from the Prime Minister up to down the implementation. There is a structural policy shift in terms of implementing this food system. For instance, there is a Stakeholder declaration, which is mainly focusing to end the children stunted growth reduce poverty and also malnutrition. School feeding. This is a policy shift. And still a lot of research are underway based on various public sectors like Ethiopian Agricultural Transformation, Ethiopian Agriculture Research Institute, and my organization, Ethiopian Policy Studies, which is mainly dealing with evidence-based research that can be taken up by the government. So there is a high shift, especially focusing on crop production, and even with less attention to the livestock. But as you all know, nutrient-dense food is provided from livestock. Although there is a shift in poultry production, highly shift in poultry production, because poultries are very easy, and in 21 days you can attain, as a breeder, I know that you can have a maximum number of production. So this all. Thank you.
Thank you, Vecna. Let's move to Malawi. Kadokera. We've heard a lot about the success of Malawi's input support market reforms. They've shown potential, but Malawi has also continues to face challenges in other areas. So would you explain to us what factors contribute to that uneven performance in the agriculture sector in Malawi, and what institutional or coordination gaps need to be addressed to achieve more consistent results across the sector?
All right, thank you so much, and I'm happy to share indeed our experience as a country in terms of agriculture performance. As I think you have rightly said, we have been having an up and down performance in terms of our agriculture performance. We have had some good years. We have had some years whereby indeed our performance has been not much into ensuring sufficiency for us as a country. And as you have rightly put, I think fertilizer or input subsidies to our farmers have had an impact in some years whereby indeed we have done so well. Apart from the input subsidy programs, I think we have also the successes that have come in coming from the expansion in the irrigation sector, whereby we're trying to move away from being a rain-fed reliance to at least bring in the irrigation concept to ensure that we produce enough as a country. And then the last part that has also brought in some success is the commercialization drive that as a country we are trying to instill into the farmers to ensure that we move away from the subsistence type of farming, to ensure that they also have that mentality that farming is not just about food, but we can also look into the commercial part of it. As you have rightly put, indeed, I think it would be more similar to what our colleagues from DRC have been experiencing. The institutional coordination problems that are there, which on bring in the fragmentation in terms of the initiatives that are being championed as a country. So there's more of a back and forth that happens within the institutions who come together and do implement initiatives that can ensure consistency in terms of performance as a country. But again, as a country, there are still inconsistencies within the funding sectors, whereby when you have those best practices being done, there's lack of continuity or even scaling up because of the lack of funding that comes in due to the competing needs that within a limited fiscal space. And again, I think as a country, we have faced a lot of dramatic shocks that erode the gains that we have each and every year. So you have progress in this year, and then come the next year, you have a cyclone that erodes almost all the gains that may have realized in the previous year. So these climatic shocks have also affected us as a country in terms of how much we can progress when it comes to agricultural performance. Nevertheless, I think as per the CADIP framework, as a country, Malawi has also adopted a food systems approach, which is, we believe, is going to drive the performance of the agriculture sector and as a country as a whole. We believe that with the food systems approach that we have adopted as a country, we should be able to try and get some solutions of some of the challenges that we have faced as a country. We have some flagship programs that we, upon implementation, can also help in terms of the challenges that we have faced. We have got the food systems framework agenda that has been adopted, and it's a cross-sectoral initiative which we believe the collaboration would help all stakeholders to come on board and champion what we believe can help the performance of us as a country in terms of the agricultural performance. And again, there are partnerships that we are leveraging in order to ensure that the performance of the agriculture sector is not mainly being driven by government. So we have got partners, actors that are part of that, the private sector, the academia, the research institutions that are part of this journey that we have embarked on. And again, to deal with the coordination part, we have come up with a steering committee which we believe that the ministries can take lead in terms of championing the policy agendas across the key sectors that can drive the food systems agenda in order for us to be able to have that consistent performance within the country and help us to achieve that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dashani. I can see you have a lot to say, but let's put a comma at that point. And now I'll turn to donors and cooperating partners. I see Jeff is ready. Your question, Jeffrey. What approaches or models have you found effective in supporting African governments? I know we worked a lot in Kenya. Maybe that applies to other African governments. What approaches or models have you found effective in supporting African governments to implement CADIP commitments sustainably, ensuring coordination across sectors, agencies, and other development partners?
Thank you. Thank you, moderator. Am I audible? All right. I think I will infuse both my experience as a policy advisor, as well as being able to have a perspective from the development partner perspective, having worked for GIZ and having been in USAID as well, and having been there when Kenya was adopting the sector strategy as the main sector strategy for the country, as well as the first National Agricultural Investment Plan. I was very young then. And what I can take out from this experience is more of, bringing, because it's more adopting, it's more domesticating documents. I think in Kenya we've succeeded to do that. We've been able to translate this document to the national level. The main challenge is Kenya is devolved. So we've only managed to do it for one level, and then not being able to take this, translate this, and bring it to implementation at the subnational level. So when you look at that aspect of policy coherence, I think it's something that needs consideration. to see how we link CADAP priorities to local action. That means really at the national level, bringing our county governments or in other countries, districts, to be able to integrate CADAP priorities. Another key approach that I think we need to emphasize as development partners is really to have this integration as a government-led. And I think I've had one of our panelists here calling to action the AUC to make sure that the political commitment does not stop at the Kampala Declaration, because I think most of us work at a technical level, and it's really difficult to speak to coherence from the technical level because it's not a technical task. I think it infuses a lot of political and cultural aspects in terms of institutionalization. So being able to embed or integrate CADAP priorities into national frameworks and national institutions, I think that is going to be one of the areas where we can create a lasting impact. I would like to infuse that with, I think, the incentives that development partners create in how we operate. And I think there are so many incentives where it's boring, it's slow to work or to target system levels. And therefore, most of us are targeting the quick results, yeah, or opting to go solo in terms of project implementation. And in transformation, I think we are not able to achieve transformation if we are not looking at a system-wide kind of approach to the way we are implementing. I think we are past the era of having a project that only implements for the results in its design. The global project, Sustainable Agricultural Systems, that I work for and policies, is very unique in how it's designed, because it's designed with flexibility to respond to political partner needs. And this has made it very possible for us to naturally adopt the levers that are, Kennedy in the presentation, that speak directly to what's needed for CADAP implementation. So around transformative policies, governance, institutionalization, innovations, anchoring, inclusivity, and even sustainable financing. So opportunely for Kenya, we are supporting the development of the second NASIP. So we are supporting the ministry in the review of the first one to see what we did right and what we did wrong and what we need to change. And as well, be able to use it in some sort of, and I think a lot of people are alluding to this, in bringing financial coherence, not just in mobilizing domestic resources, but also being able to speak to what kind of investment, financing and targeting that's needed at the country level. So I would really speak to the donor space, really, in the Kenyan spirit as well, to be able to look at the system levers, whether it's boring, whether it's slow, whether it takes time before you start seeing the results. But in that system, in the processes, in the structures, in the institutional capacities, I think that's where we are able to leverage or even see catalytic impact and some sort of acceleration towards the growth and the transformations that we want, that's aligning to the CADAP priorities and speaking all the way to the local levels. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff. When you said at some point you joined ESID when you were young, I had some people respond. I don't know what the response was, but yes, you have a wealth of experience. Thank you very much. Saji, to you. We know that you are engaged in dialogue on the repurposing of agricultural support worldwide, including in Africa. Based on your experience, what role do policy incentives and smart public spending play in transforming agriculture? And a follow-up to that, what lessons have you learned from the CADAP implementation that you can share with us as you have engaged in different African countries? Thank you.
Thank you. Let me bring a little bit insights from outside of the continent, as this was a lot has been told today and will be discussed today and tomorrow what's happening in Africa. But I would like to just to share the couple of three takeaways from my experience on how the public policies and expenditures matter and what it means for CAADP 3.0 implementation. First, I would say, and again, it's from the discussion of one of the ministers of finance I had, he says, if I don't have data, if I don't have evidence, then I'm listening to the lobbyists and I'm take my decision based on what they say because I don't have alternative data. So if you don't give me, if you don't have statistics, if you don't have data, if you don't have analysis, then the politicians listen to somebody else. It's trivial, but it's very important. We are on this scientific conference. This is the ANAPRI network. So I think your job is to deliver evidence. Second is that all expenditures are not equal. Absolutely not equal. I know countries who spend 2-3% of GDP on agriculture and getting very little. When I say very little, the average growth is between 1 and 2% on the long period of time. And I know countries spend 0.3, 0.5% of GDP, and they grow at 3-4% of the GDP, right? So I think it's really matter. If we look in Latin America, 10 countries, 10 years ago, if you relocate 10% of expenditures from direct fund payments into the general support services, which is the public goods, extension, research, roads, irrigation, just 10%, your agricultural GDP per capita will grow 5% faster. To achieve the same outcome, you need to increase the total level of expenditures by 25%. So you have a choice. You need to increase your budget by 25%, or you can relocate 10% of the existing budget to the better usage to achieve the same result. It's very powerful. The same, look on the EU. 15 years ago, their direct fund payments were full of the coupled support. It means each sector received different treatment. Let's simplify it. They have per hectare payments. Wheat producers received $50 per hectare. Maize producer, $200 per hectare. Livestock produced $300 per hectare. So the politicians and the lobbyists decided what is more important. And that was the decision on the paper. Now, 15 years ago was this shift of the ideas in the EU. It's the same amount of money, 0.3% of GDP, but 80% of that support is now decoupled. It means the farmers getting per hectare the same amount of money, but they decide what they produce. So they respond to the markets. They decide what they respond to what consumers want, not what the government wants, right? And in these 15 years, the net export, the agri-food net export in the EU increased from $1 billion to $15 billion, right? So they were the very small exporters. They imported a lot and exported a lot, but the balance was close to zero. Now they are $15-16 billion because their support responds to consumers, not to the governments. There is still 15% of the support coupled. This is essentially the political economy decision. Politicians still need to spend money on their priorities. So get your 15%, but 85% spent on the right things. Then you will get results. And final example. We all know about the power of research and extension to drive total factor productivity, right? And we all know that farmers who use their inputs better survive. Farmers who just increase use of inputs, they will probably go bankrupt. And so when you look globally, investments in research and development explains in developed countries about 70% of the productivity growth. In middle-income countries like China, Brazil, India, large countries, that explain about 50% of total productivity growth. You take Africa, the data again, not the best, but what we can get, expenditures in research and extension explain maybe 30% of the productivity growth. So research, just spending more money on research right now is not going to give you much productivity. You need to look on what is wrong with the institutional research right now. When I look at any country in Africa, research and extension seems to be a donor baby. And the government decided, no, all donors want to spend on research and extension, we are not spending money. Because every donor wants to do a little bit on capacity building, training, research. It's donor, it's not our business. And just one practical challenge with that. It's true, we are ready to spend more, but the problem is, you need to have the core group of people who will use donor money and translate that into action. And right now, it's just in the very simple repurposing scale, the government need to have triple number of the researchers and pay them much more because donors cannot do it. Every donor cannot pay salaries of the researchers, right? And so we are channeling all of this money into research, talking to each other. The government is not spending because say, look, because the donors spend there. But just simple tweak in the government expenditures can have a much bigger impact on the agricultural growth. And so I just give you this example in just one more minute because the quality of expenditure matter a lot. I hear again, and again, 10%, 10% cut-up target, 10% cut-up target is great aspiration. You have to remind these to non-agricultural people, right? To ministers of finance, etc. But within agricultural family, get into substance what these 10% are spent on. Because if they are spent on other things, it doesn't matter. You can spend 20%. It will still not give you a result. Thank you.
Thank you, Saji. I think they've done very well. So can you give them a very hearty clap? Thank you very much. Because of time, I'll bring this to a close, and I'm not going to attempt to summarize what you have said. A lot of interesting things. Anthony, maybe next time you give me more time with these panelists. But as we conclude, I'd like to ask Andrew to prepare to come and give us some summary and next steps. And as he comes, I will take 2 questions. Only 2. 1, 2, done. Okay, Rosemary. Thankfully, I know their names, but their hands just went up. So Rosemary and Gideon. I could be. Rosemary, is there a mic there? Put up your hand, please. Yeah. Okay, use that mic.
Thank you very much. As Lillian just said, I'm Rosemary from APRC in Uganda. And my just 2 questions, one to the Kennedy and one to Dr. Bahigwa. To Kennedy, you talked about the 6 objectives of CADEP 3.0. And I'm just wondering if there are some low-hanging ones that the countries could start with as they get momentum for domestication of the other objectives, and how would that augur with what Dr. Bahigwa already said about the piecemeal implementation in CADEP 1.0 and 2.0. Then to Dr. Bahigwa, I'm just wondering, it may be just one in terms of strength, one in terms of opportunities, and one in terms of threats. What do you think are the strengths, opportunities, and risks currently that were not there for CADEP 1 and CADEP 2 that you think will propel Kampala Declaration to success? Thank you.
Thank you, Rosemary. Her question to Bahigwa is loaded. Bahigwa, just take 2 minutes to answer. Gideon, please.
Yeah, this Bahigwa and the keynote address. I'm Gideon Obari, Tegemeo Institute. And then the last one, I think I'll direct it to the donors.
Can I suggest you prioritize 2? Don't go to 3.
Just only 2, yeah.
Yes, please.
Africa is the size of the US, China, India, Mexico, Japan, and a number of European countries combined in terms of space. Now, and it consists of 54 countries. AUE, AUC is making CADIP 3 as if, I want to imagine, as if this huge landmass is homogeneous. Is that possible? I mean, visually, is it possible to develop strategies that will cover that huge landmass and expect some outcomes that are measurable? To the donors, I mean, you've been investing a lot of money in this huge landmass for over a period of time. Do you have that feel that you're getting return to your investment? And why is it that you are concerned in investing in this landmass, in terms of agriculture? Is there something that you are expecting to get in return?
Thank you, Gideon. Now, I will restrict the responses just to 2 people, Godfrey and Saji. Anybody else, please, let's speak over lunch. Over to you, Godfrey. And respond very briefly, please.
Yeah, thank you. This requires a lot of time to respond, but I try to be brief. I think it goes back to the points that I made earlier. The biggest risk is not taking action. Around not domesticating the 6 commitments into national action plans that are owned by the stakeholders in the countries. Because remember, the 6 strategic objectives in the 10-year action plan, they are guidelines. They are not instructions for member states to implement. They are simply guidelines where the continent has come together and say, if we are going to transform agri-food systems on this continent, these should be the focus areas. But you may find that a particular country, maybe 4 or 5 of those are the most relevant, or elements of those. And so countries are expected to take the 6 commitments and see what is best for them. These are continental guidelines. They are not instructions to implement. So that's why we use the word domestication. Take the commitments, translate them into plans that you can implement at national level, and allocate resources to them. So beyond producing a document, the National Agri-Food Systems Investment Plan, that's one thing, it's the first step that outlines the priorities that the country is actually going to do. But most importantly is allocating resources, quality resources, as Sergey was saying, in those areas where you are going to get the highest returns to investment. So domestication is going to be important, but allocating resources for implementation. Mobilizing resources, adequate resources. As you have heard from different speakers, foreign aid has been coming down, and the presentation that was made earlier showed that it will even go down further. So expecting donor resources to invest in agri-food systems, maybe that's the wrong expectation. Mobilizing domestic resources has to be the focus of our member states, but where those resources are inadequate, definitely then you have to go to international financial institutions to borrow the additional resources. On the opportunities, I mean, in the 10-year strategy and action plan, I'm about to finish. In the 10-year strategy and action plan, we did highlight the drivers of agri-food systems over the next 10 years. And one of those is the growing population of Africa as consumers. So the middle class is growing, demanding more protein-rich foods. So there lies opportunities for investing in livestock, whether it is cattle, chicken, and so on, because that growing middle class is going to demand those foods. But also for commodities where you see international prices consistently rising. I'm a coffee farmer, so we are very happy now with the current coffee prices. Again, there are opportunities for investment by the private sector, but we can discuss more. I have a lot to say.
I can tell you have a lot to say. Saji, can you summarize your response in a minute?
Yep. It's very critical to attract more private capital in African agriculture. No governments in the world will have enough money to replace private capital, right? So when the World Bank, I think in terms of happiness, I'll come back whether we're happy with progress. I think it's very important to look on how the policies and expenditures crowd in or crowd out the private investments. I think we are happy to be the partners to avoid the worst situation. I think without our support, situation might have been the worst. But we are not happy about the speed of the progress going forward. No? So, and as many of you are, we are discussing the CAADP 3.0, a lot of challenges. We share the challenges. I think looking forward with all of the discussion on the constraints, on the volumes of the investments, the quality will really be a discussion with us and the governments around the table to really make sure that we have the policies and expenditures aligned with crowded in private investments, especially on the inputs markets, especially on the other markets. And so I think that will be a bit different, much more serious than was the case before. And I hope with that we will make more significant contribution into the African agriculture. Thank you.
Thank you, Saji. I'm looking for Andrew. Andrew, I'm not sure how you're going to do the summary. Andrew, 1 minute. Andrew, oh, you don't even want me to introduce you? Okay.
So primarily, this session is suggesting that there are 3 things we are looking at. First of all, to get the Kampala Agreement to feed into the Agenda 2063. And to do that, we are taking a value chain approach. That would require sourcing a lot of finance, both locally and then across the world. So how do we do that? Our keynote speaker suggests that for that to happen, we need accountability, robust implementation mechanism by fostering collaboration and human development. And this would also require a multi-sectorial emphasis on sustainable resource mobilization. So what did those who have experience think we should do differently? First, he suggests that we need shared partnerships. And those shared partnerships should feed into a domestication approach. So within each country, we need to take and feed the Kampala Agreement into it. Second, he believes that the M&E reports we generated in the past, we didn't use it fully, and we need to pay attention to them as we move forward. Improved governance systems is also crucial for him as we think about the food systems approach. That was crucial. So we also listened to our private sector people, and one of the key things that they are making us understand is that generation of evidence is not sufficient, but we should also build their capacity and the capacity of the state to use it. For the state, their thinking is that the governance structure needs to change. And for instance, in DRC, they need to ensure that there is coordination and collaboration among institutions which do work related to agriculture. In Malawi, yes, they've been doing things, but it's not worked quite well. And in their minds, if a food systems approach is adopted, perhaps something could be gained out of that. So what should we go forward with as key next steps? First, integration and collaboration is crucial, and that should be supported locally and from the center. Second, donors should also be flexible as they work with country governments, so that they don't come in with plans in a rigid way